Chapter 167. This fatty was, of course, Old Ma. Old Ma stood in the crowd, looking with worry at Lu Chen, who had been captured by the Su family. He was originally a secret agent, so he was very well informed. The time it took for the Su family to clash with Lu Chen on the street, and the time it took for him to be escorted to the gates of the Su residence was enough for him to know what had happened. Old Ma rushed over and saw the scene of pushing and shoving in front of the gates of the Su residence. His face was as gloomy as water, his pupils slightly contracted. Someone pushed forward and bumped into him, but he did not even react, his gaze only fixed on Lu Chen. Then, when Lu Chen was escorted to the gates of the Su residence by the crowd, the servants and guards in the gatehouse rushed out to speak with Su Qian, Su Wen and the others. He temporarily stopped and turned his head to look. In the blink of an eye, they saw each other. Their gazes met in the air. Old Ma's lips moved slightly. After taking a deep breath, he took a step forward. But at this time, Lu Chen suddenly shook his head lightly. Old Ma immediately stopped, standing stiffly in place like a pillar, even if his eyes flashed with a layer of indescribable pain and anger. His hands were hidden in his wide sleeves, clenched into fists, his fingernails digging into his flesh, leaving deep white marks. His gaze was silent, but it seemed to say something. Two silent men, standing in the crowd, seemed to be a lonely shadow outside of this world. At this point in life, it was like a trace of mud flitting across the years, or like someone's meaningless and distant sigh. So, there were actually so many more important things. Old Ma raised his head, looking at the sky. It was daytime, the sky bright and clear. In this beautiful world, in this bright day, how could there be a shadow? He gritted his teeth, but smiled, and then slowly lowered his head. Lu Chen was escorted into the Su residence. Without a doubt, this was the first time Lu Chen had come to the Su family's mansion in Kunwa City. This was the place where the Su clan resided in Kunwa City, and it was also their most fundamental foundation. Over the years, many extraordinary people had come out of this mansion, and they had allowed the Su family to prosper for many years. Even today, the Su family had not declined, and in the foreseeable future, it seemed that the Su family would continue to prosper. This was because another talented genius had appeared here. She was like a perfect fairy who lived on the Flying Goose Terrace. The Su residence was, of course, very large, and at the same time very luxurious. Moreover, because it had flourished for many years, it had a deep heritage and accumulation, so there was also an extremely deep aura of nobility here. The paintings on the veranda, the exquisite carvings of birds and beasts on the eaves, the seemingly ordinary but actually incomparably precious flowers and trees, all of them showed that this place was different from the rest, showing that the Su family was a truly famous and influential clan. However, compared to the heavy accumulation in the surroundings, Su Qian, Su Wen, and the others who were escorting Lu Chen seemed somewhat out of place. Each and every one of them was in high spirits, arrogant and domineering. The servants who passed by on the road retreated one after another, and those who didn't have time to greet them hurriedly. Su Qian and Su Wen naturally didn't have the time to talk nonsense with these servants. At most, when they saw a few pretty young maidservants, they would laugh heartily and hug them to take advantage of them. They would touch here and there and pat their buttocks, causing those maidservants to turn pale and scatter in all directions like startled birds. Then, they would laugh at their backs and shout, You, come to my room tonight, I, your young master, have taken a fancy to you." The attendants at the side all laughed heartily. Each and every one of them seemed to be very excited. The only person in the crowd who didn't laugh was probably Lu Chen. None of the surrounding people of the Su residence stood out to speak. After all, Su Qian, Su Wen, and that young master Sumo who was still recuperating were known as the three heroes of the Su family. They were the most favored of the younger generation of the Su family. In particular, Sumo was the flesh and blood of the current madam of the household. She was normally the most spoiled, and she was also the younger brother of Su Qingjun, who was currently at the peak of her power. It could be said that no one dared to provoke her. When Lord Su and young lady Su Qingjun were here, perhaps they could still manage these young masters. But now that young Lady Qingjun was living on the Kunlun Mountains, no one dared to meddle in the matters that Lord Su could not manage. Otherwise, they would be punished. Normally, there would have been people coming over to reprimand them, but today, it seemed that no one was willing to stand up for them. Su Qian and Su Wen were also fearless. They walked all the way to a courtyard on the west side of the Su residence. Before they entered, Su Wen already shouted, Brother Mo, are you there? Quickly come and see who I've caught for you. Today, I'll let you vent your anger, ha 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 ha. Everyone laughed heartily and walked in together. Lu Chen looked around the courtyard and saw that there was an extremely luxurious two-story building at the front. There was a pond of flowers and plants at the side. The flowers that bloomed were all magnificent and filled with a luxurious atmosphere. It was even more luxurious than the Su residence he saw from the outside. But that kind of dignified atmosphere was nowhere to be found here. In front of the small building, there was a large reclining chair. A man was lying on it. His appearance was somewhat similar to Su Qian and Su Wen. It was Sumo. At this moment, he sat up and looked over with a surprised expression. Then, Su Qian and Su Wen walked over and said a few words to him. Sumo immediately revealed a happy expression. Then, he looked in Lu Chen's direction with a somewhat disgusted and ruthless expression. Lu Chen also looked at Sumo. As the most unlucky of the three brothers of the Su family that day on the Flying Goose platform, Su Qingjuan's attack on him, actually, it was his foot that was the heaviest. It was said that this fellow broke several bones and couldn't get up for half a month. Looking at his current appearance, it seemed that he really hadn't fully recovered. Once a woman flipped out, it was still very scary. In Lu Chen's mind flashed the image of Su Qingjuan's valiant and heroic posture, after flipping the table on the Flying Goose platform. He couldn't help but laugh in his heart. But on the surface, he still quickly lowered his head and didn't look at the people around him, appearing somewhat timid. Just now at the Su residence's front door, he saw old Ma. With their many years of working together and friendship, even if it was just a silent glance, they were able to exchange a lot of information and thoughts. He saw old Ma's worry, but in the end he still stopped him. The evil sect spy hiding in the Kunlun Mountains had still not been found. No matter what, it was not the time for him to expose his identity. Since he had to compromise, since he was determined to endure it, then there was no point in continuing to resist. Bring him over. Sumo, who was sitting on the rattan chair, shouted loudly. The attendants beside her immediately surrounded Lu Chen and pushed him to the stone steps in front of the small building. Su Qian and Su Wen stood beside Sumo. Sumo looked very excited. She stared at Lu Chen and said with a hideous smile, "Brat, do you still recognize me?" "Yes, you are Master Su." Lu Chen replied honestly. Sumo laughed and said, "You didn't expect this day would come, right?" Lu Chen sighed and said, "Master Su, if I say that what happened that day was a misunderstanding and it really has nothing to do with me, will you believe me?" "Pay." The three brothers of the Su family on the step spat in unison, their faces showing disdain. Sumo said fiercely, "Do you think we are fools?" Su Wen stood at the side and sneered, "In the past, Sister June was so good to us and would grant all our requests. But after you came to the Flying Goose platform, so many things happened. What not seeing us, what scolding us for waiting, and finally even beating us. Who else can we blame but you?" Sumo snorted and said, "Why are you talking so much nonsense with this guy? Damn it. I've been beaten up for no reason, and I've long been stifled in my heart. Today, I must vent my anger." After saying that, he suddenly raised his voice and roared, "Someone, bring my treasures here." Someone at the side had already answered. Then, two people went and walked into the small building, laughing and joking. After a while, they came out with a few big boxes and placed them in front of the three brothers of the Su family. Then, they opened them one by one. Everyone present, including the Su family brothers and the servants, laughed coldly. Their laughter was bone-chilling, like wild beasts that were about to devour people. "Kid, do you want to pick one for yourself?" Sumo clicked her tongue and narrowed her eyes. Like a cat, she looked at the mouse that she had caught with a tyrannical gaze. She grinned and said, "Don't worry, I won't let you die so easily." Lu Chen looked down and saw that the boxes were neatly arranged, and they were all strangely shaped instruments of torture. At this moment, those incomparably sharp blades, those hair-raising spikes, and all kinds of indescribable and terrifying torture tools were all emitting a cold radiance under the sunlight that fell from the sky. For the first time, Lu Chen's face became gloomy. Then, he raised his head and quietly glanced at the three arrogant and domineering Su family brothers standing on the steps. His eyes were cold. Outside the Su family's gate, the crowd of onlookers had yet to disperse. There would never be a lack of busybodies. It was in many people's nature to watch the fun. He Gang stood in the crowd. He was a little anxious, a little excited, and a little regretful that he couldn't go in and see Lu Chen being punished. However, the words that came from the crowd around him from time to time still made him obtain great satisfaction. The rumor that the three brothers of the Su family liked to use torture to punish their servants and make them beg for death, although there was no evidence, it was vividly described as if it was true. In the crowd, He Gang was happy. On the other side, Old Ma's face was slightly trembling and twisted. He was forcibly suppressing the anger and anxiety in his heart. It was at this time that they suddenly raised their heads at the same time and looked towards the sky. A bright ray of light, like a shocking rainbow, flew over. The sharp whistling sound of breaking through the air was deafening. It could be seen how fast it was. In just a moment, this rainbow light directly landed in front of the Su family's gate. Some cultivators in the crowd with better eyesight had already cried out in surprise, "This is a golden core cultivator." Chapter 168. When the light dissipated, a beautiful woman appeared in front of the gates of the Su residence. This immediately caused a commotion in the surrounding crowd, as well as the group of servants and guards of the Su residence. All of a sudden, the crowd gathered around him and greeted him one after another. However, behind the crowd, there was a manservant whose expression suddenly changed. After looking left and right, he took advantage of the crowd's inattention to sneak away and ran into the depths of the Su residence. Old Li, who was standing at the front of the crowd, was the first to call out, "Young miss, why are you back?" This person was naturally Su Qingjun. At this moment, she was dressed no different from usual, with a scarlet feather cape and a long sword on her back. But her expression did not look good. After looking at the surrounding people, she nodded to Old Li, who was standing at the front of the crowd, and called out, "Uncle Li." Old Li had been in the Su family for many years, and it could be said that he had watched this generation of youngsters grow up. In the past, when Su Qingjun was still at home, she would respectfully call him Uncle Li when they met. But at this moment, when Old Li saw Su Qingjun's expression, his heart skipped a beat. In the past, although Su Qingjun was indifferent in front of others, she had always been well-mannered and polite to servants and her other brothers and sisters. But today, although there seemed to be no change on the surface, there seemed to be a faint anger in her. Standing on the stone steps of the main entrance, Su Qingjun looked back and saw that the street in front of the Su residence was surrounded by many people, all of them stretching their necks to look in this direction. Her expression slightly sank, and she asked Old Li, "What's going on?" Old Li did not know what to say for a moment, but when Su Qingjun looked at him and slightly furrowed her brows, that natural majesty and reverence towards the legendary Jin Dan friar made him quickly make a decision. No matter how arrogant the three young masters of the Su family were, how could they be compared to the genius girl in front of him? As a result, Old Li obediently recounted what he had just seen. At the end, he pointed at the crowd in front of him and said, "Young masters Su Qian and Su Wen captured the people and brought them into the manor. Those people were the ones who had come to watch along the way and have been waiting here for a long time." A trace of anger flashed across Su Qingjun's face, and she asked in a low voice, "What does that person look like?" Old Li thought for a moment, then described the appearance of the man who had been captured by Su Qian and Su Wen. A few of the servants beside him also added a few sentences to the story. For the servants of this kind of rich and powerful family, observing one's expression was the most basic skill. The few people here only watched for a while, and they could faintly see that this young miss of their family was very dissatisfied with the actions of the few young masters. Anyway, no matter who made the choice, the Su family would definitely rely on this young miss in the future, so there was nothing to hide. The serious thing was, if they did not say anything now, and someone had the intention to complain in the future, then it would be terrible. After listening to Old Li and the others describe the appearance of the person who had been captured, Su Qingjun quickly determined that it was most likely Lu Qin. As for why Su Qian and Su Wen would suddenly find trouble with Lu Qin, Su Qingjun also had an idea in her heart, but it was also because of this that she became even more angry, and a little worried. So after listening to Old Li's words, she quickly nodded her head, and then walked into the Su residence with a cold face. Naturally, no one dared to stop her, and in an instant, a path opened up. Unexpectedly, at this moment, a servant girl suddenly ran out of the Su residence. She had a pretty appearance, and looked to be around 14 or 15 years old. Her expression was a little anxious, and when she saw Su Qingjun walk in, she hurriedly ran over with large strides. She first bowed to Su Qingjun, then hurriedly said in a loud voice, "Young miss, Madam heard that you've returned, and is very happy. She wants you to meet her in the front hall." Su Qingjun's footsteps stopped, and a trace of surprise appeared on her face. "Mother wants me to go over?" The servant girl nodded repeatedly, and said with a smile, "Yes, Madam said that she hasn't seen you in a long time. It's rare for young miss to return today, so she wants to see you immediately." A trace of hesitation flashed across Su Qingjun's face. Since she was young, she had been taught to be an educated and reasonable person, to be filial to her parents, and to be friendly to her younger siblings. These should have been things that were right and proper. Moreover, after she entered the Kunlun party, she lived on the mountain for a long time, and the number of times she returned home had decreased, and she rarely had the opportunity to be in front of her parents. Thinking of this, she glanced in the direction of the west side of the Su residence. She still understood the few younger brothers and cousins in the family. Although they were usually a little naughty and mischievous, they were respectful in front of her. She also didn't hear that they had done anything too vile. After a while, there shouldn't be any big problems, right? After thinking for a while, she nodded her head, and said to the servant girl, "Okay, then I'll go over." The front hall of the Su residence was behind the courtyard, and looking from afar, it was a spacious, square, and grand house. At this moment, the doors and windows were open, and several servant girls walked in and out. When they saw Su Qingjun walk in, they all revealed a smile and greeted her, and the sound of "young miss" rose and fell. Of course, Su Qingjun wouldn't show any face to these servant girls. There was no need, and it didn't conform to her character. After lightly nodding in acknowledgement, she walked into the hall, and saw the woman sitting in the main seat in the hall. If one were to calculate her age, she should actually be in her early 40s, but she maintained herself very well, and there were almost no wrinkles on her face. She was slightly fair, and plump, and the outline of her appearance was also somewhat similar to Su Qingjun. It could be seen that when she was young, she should have been a great beauty. Most of Su Qingjun's current appearance should also be inherited from her. After seeing Su Qingjun, the madam immediately stood up, and with a happy smile on her face, she waved at Su Qingjun and said, "Jun, you're back. Quickly come over and let me see you. I haven't seen you for a while." Su Qingjun responded, walked in front of her mother, and helped her to sit down. The madam's surname was Bai, and she was born in the Bai clan, one of the influential families in Kunwa City, so most people called her Madam Bai. At this moment, Madam Bai looked at her daughter with eyes full of heartache and love. She grabbed Su Qingjun's hand and put it on her knee, and the two of them sat together and chatted for a while. It seemed that she was afraid that her beloved daughter would suffer in Kunlun Mountain. Su Qingjun also felt somewhat helpless, but she still felt some warmth in her heart. In this world, no matter what, the love of parents was still the most sincere and considerate. After answering Madame Bai's questions one by one, she finally said with a smile, "Mother, you don't need to be so worried. Don't forget that I've also cultivated to the Jin Dan realm. In any case, I'm a Jin Dan friar. I'm immune to cold and heat, and I won't get sick. Don't worry. Madame Bai snorted, stroked her daughter's black, shiny, and soft long hair, and said, if I came from an ordinary family, I might believe you. Unfortunately, in any case, I'm the daughter of the Bai clan, and I've been married to the Su family for dozens of years. How could I not know these things about cultivation? She sighed, and her face looked a little sad and worried. She said to Su Qingjun, as a cultivator, if you have some achievements in cultivation, you naturally won't have the illnesses of ordinary people. But how can you not have troubles just like that? All kinds of hardships and pain in cultivation, the backlash of taking pills and spiritual materials, and all kinds of dangers when breaking through to the next realm. On the contrary, it's still much more than ordinary people. Even when you cultivators quarrel and fight with others, those with high cultivation often want to kill people. Do you think I don't know? Su Qingjun was also speechless. Then she smiled bitterly and said, Mother, it's actually not as exaggerated as you say. Madame Bai patted her hand, and gently said, I know. Anyway, you can be considered to have some achievements in cultivation. I'm also a little more relieved. But you still have to take care of yourself, understand? I understand. Also, when you are on the Kunlun mountain, when you have time, take care of your younger brother Sumo. As for the rest of the family, you can do as you see fit. Mo, is your biological younger brother. His talent is not as high as yours. It's also my fault. When I was giving birth to him, I met with something that didn't go my way. Anger attacked my heart and caused me to have a difficult birth, causing his innate vitality to be damaged. AI. Su Qingjun softly said, Mother, don't worry. I will naturally take good care of my younger brothers at home. Madame Bai looked at her, and her face slightly darkened. She said, That's right. A few days ago, when Mo came back from the mountain, he was seriously injured. He couldn't get out of bed for 10 days to half a month. I originally wanted to investigate this matter. In the end, after carefully interrogating Su Qian and Su Wen, they said that it was you who injured Mo. I scolded them at that time, saying how could that be possible? You are Mo's biological sister, how could this be? Su Qingjun was silent for a moment. She looked at Madame Bai's face and said in a low voice, Mother, that matter was indeed done by me. Madame Bai tightened her grip on Jun Linyuan's hand. She didn't speak for a while. She just stared at Jun Linyuan and frowned. Jun, I know your temperament. You are usually the most sensible person in the world. You also love your younger siblings very much. What happened? Why did you have to be so heavy-handed? Why did you have to teach your half-brother a lesson? Su Qingjuan's face showed a slight struggle. After hesitating for a while, she shook her head and said, Mother, when my younger brother was on the mountain that day, he did indeed do something wrong. Madame Bai's face darkened. She said, What on earth did he do wrong? Tell me. Su Qingjun had no choice but to tell her what happened on the Flying Goose platform that day. After listening to her, a trace of displeasure flashed across Madame Bai's face. She said lightly, Just for an irrelevant person, you broke your younger brother's bones. Isn't this a bit too much? When Su Qingjun wanted to explain more, suddenly, from outside the hall, from somewhere far away in the mansion of the Su mansion, came a sudden burst of noise and shouting. Among them, there were people laughing loudly, and there were also people shouting in pain. Su Qingjun suddenly stood up and looked out of the room. Her face instantly darkened. Chapter 169. I'm going out for a walk. Su Qingjun turned around and said to Madame Bai. She was about to walk out, but she heard Madame Bai suddenly call her and said, Jun, come and sit down. I have something to tell you. Su Qingjuan's body froze in place. After a moment of hesitation, she frowned slightly and said to Madame Bai in a soft voice, Mother, I have something urgent to deal with now. Can I come and talk to you after I'm done? Madame Bai stared at her, and her face gradually darkened. She said lightly, Why? In your opinion, is there anything more important than your parents in this world? Su Qingjun was stunned and speechless. She turned around to look at Madame Bai and said, "Mother, how can you have such a thought? I've never disrespected you." Madame Bai looked at her for a while and suddenly sighed. She said, "My good daughter, of course I believe you. Come here." She waved at Su Qingjun. Su Qingjun was a little hesitant, but then she slowly walked over. Madame Bai stood up and gently held her in her arms. There was a trace of love on her face. She murmured, "In this world, how can there be parents who don't love their children? June, I'm really thinking about you." Su Qingjun was silent for a moment. She said, "Mother, still don't quite understand what you mean." Madame Bai shook her head and said, "You're in a hurry to go out now. Do you want to go to your brother's place?" Su Qingjun suddenly raised her head and looked at Madame Bai. She looked surprised and blurted out, "Mother, how did you know?" She paused for a moment, and then her face turned cold. She said, "Then you also know what Sumo did?" Madame Bai gently waved her hand and said, "That child is only a little naughty. It's only because you beat him up so badly last time that he has nowhere to vent his anger. He doesn't dare to cause trouble for you. Isn't he just casually finding an insignificant servant to vent his anger on? What's there to be surprised about?" Su Qingjun's eyes showed some surprise and anger. She said in a low voice, "That's not right." Madame Bai snorted and said, "There are many big and small aristocratic families in Kunwa City. There are many young people there who beat people to vent their anger. Beating and scolding is like a common thing. Don't say it as if you haven't seen it since you were a child." Su Qingjun wanted to say something, but she hesitated. She clenched her teeth and said after a long while, "Mother, that's different. He's a Kunlun disciple, he's just a part-time disciple." Madame Bai suddenly raised her voice and said, "He has no talent and no background. What's the difference between him and the servants in our family?" Su Qingjun slowly clenched her fists inside her sleeves, but her head slightly drooped. Seeing her expression, Madame Bai's heart seemed to soften. She lowered her voice and said softly, "June, you're the most outstanding person in our Su family. You're also the child that both your father and I love the most. If nothing unexpected happens in the future, the foundation of our Su family will definitely be handed over to you. Even if you're infatuated with cultivation and have no interest in worldly money, when your younger brother inherits the family business in the future, won't he also have to fulfill all your requests and do his best to provide for you? You must always remember that we're a family. Blood is thicker than water. Nothing can compare to this." Su Qingjun slowly raised her head and suddenly said, "Mother, did Sumo say something to you?" Madame Bai glared at her and said, "What's Sumo? Sumo is not Sumo. He's your younger brother." After that, she said lightly, "You're so young now, but you've already cultivated to the Jin Dan realm. Your future is limitless. Not to mention Shinrin Yuanying, you can even have a chance to explore deity transformation stage Shinrin. With such a bright future, how could a good-for-nothing part-time disciple be worthy of you?" Su Qingjun was stunned. Then, she slowly shook her head as if she couldn't believe it. She said bitterly, How could you think like that? How could you say that?" Madame Bai's face darkened. She said, "Am I wrong? Do you dare to swear to God that you don't have the slightest affection for that man named Lu Chen?" Su Qingjun was just about to speak, but she suddenly fell silent. After a while, she smiled bitterly and said, "Mother, you're thinking too much. It's not like that at all. It's true, everyone has a time when they're young." Madame Bai suddenly interrupted her and said coldly, "Everyone is young and full of love. It's human nature. It's not a big deal. Even when I was young, before I married your father, my heart was also moved by those free and unrestrained wastrels who roamed the world. But in the end?" She smiled faintly and didn't continue speaking. Instead, she gently held Su Qingjun's hand and said, "June, listen to your mother. I'm doing this for your own good." Su Qingjun took a deep breath and shook her head. She said, "Mother, I think you've really misunderstood. I dare to swear to God that from the beginning to the end, since I joined the Kunlun party to cultivate, I've never had an affair. But this matter has nothing to do with Lu Qin. Sumo has found the wrong person. As she said this, she turned around and walked quickly towards the door of the hall. Madame Bai suddenly shouted, "Stop!" Su Qingjuan's body paused for a moment. She looked back at her and said, "Mother, haven't I already said?" Madame Bai said coldly, "Why don't you take a look at yourself now? For an outsider who has nothing to do with us, you look like you're burning with anxiety. You're in such a hurry to make things difficult for your own brother?" Su Qingjun said loudly, "I'm not going to make things difficult for him. It's him who did something wrong. If he has the ability, he can come to me. I'm the one who hurt him. Why does he want to vent his anger on me?" Slap. Suddenly, a crisp sound came from the hall. It was Madame Bai who slapped Su Qingjun hard in the face with a livid face. Su Qingjun covered her cheek with her hand. There was a look of disbelief in her eyes. She looked at Madame Bai in astonishment. It seemed that even her voice was a little shaky. She said, "Mother, I'm hitting you to wake you up." Madame Bai said coldly, "What? Do you think you're great now that you're Jean Dan Friar? You can crush me with one finger. That's nothing. Come over and draw your sword and kill me." Su Qingjun took a step back. There was a painful expression on her face. She shook her head and said, "Mother, how could I?" Madame Bai took a deep breath and calmed down her unusually excited mood. Then she stared at Su Qingjun and said, "Jun, listen to me. Your father and I are not young anymore. How can there be immortality in this world? Our only wish is that you and Mo can help each other for the rest of your life. Because in this world, there's no one who is closer than blood. If you don't believe in your own brother and this blood, who else can you believe in?" Looking at Su Qingjun, she raised her voice and yelled with unusual anger, "But now, you're going to make things difficult for your brother for an outsider. How can I be at ease after 100 years? Are you trying to anger me to death?" She scolded Su Qingjun angrily, as if she was looking at a child who was resentful of iron for not becoming steel. There was even a faint trace of tears in her eyes. Su Qingjun stepped back in a daze. She grew up listening to heaven and earth, her parents, and her teachers. She was taught to be respectful, and she had always done so. For so many years, no one had ever said that she was wrong. No one had ever not praised her for being sensible and polite. Everyone thought that she was the best daughter in the world. But all of this seemed to have suddenly changed today. "Are you trying to anger me to death?" Her mother's question exploded in her ears like a clap of thunder, causing her to feel dizzy and her mind to go blank. She staggered a few steps back. As if it was instinctive, she subconsciously wanted to walk out. "Listen, I won't argue with you about the matter of you hurting Mo last time, seeing that we are a family." Madame Bai looked at her coldly from behind and said, "But if you dare to find trouble with him again, I will kill myself in this hall, in front of you." Su Qingjuan's body shook and her face instantly turned pale. She turned around and looked at Madame Bai, as if she was looking at a stranger. 2 streams of tears flowed down her cheeks and she said in a trembling voice, "Mother, why do you have to do this? Why do you have to do this?" Madame Bai's face was ashen as she turned around and no longer looked at her. She said, "If you really dare to disobey me, then go and try it yourself. Otherwise, hurry up and leave this place now. Immediately return to Kunlun Mountain. Leave immediately." At the end of her words, her tone was harsh and stern. Su Qingjun looked at her in a daze. Then she slowly walked out of the hall. Under the strange gazes of the servants, she used her hand to wipe away the tears on her face. This way, she could pretend that she was still perfect. She slowly, step by step, walked towards the front. From the depths of the mansion, tyrannical laughter and painful voices still floated over from time to time. There were even more joyful laughter as if she was the accomplice of a villain. But her footsteps still involuntarily walked towards the Su Fu's main gate. Heaven and earth, father and mother. High like a peak, heavy like a mountain. She raised her head and looked at the sky. The azure blue sky seemed to have no end. It was so deep and vast, endless. Her face was pale, as if there was not a trace of blood. Unknowingly, she really did walk in front of the Su Fu's main gate. The group of servants and guards hurriedly came forward. The one leading them was still old Li, looking at Su Qingjuan's face. He said with some worry, "Eldest young miss, are you all right?" Su Qingjun did not respond to his words. She only stared blankly at the several stone steps in front of the Su Fu's main gate. She had never thought that these stone steps in her own house would be so difficult to walk. The most difficult thing in the world, was it the ways of the world? Her face was pale as she stood in front of this huge aristocratic family's main gate. She stood under the Su family's large signboard. The people at the side looked at each other, but for a moment, no one dared to say anything. She did not know how long she stood there. The wind blew past her body, her hair and clothes all slightly fluttered. Gradually, a clear and cold feeling seeped out. Clear as water. Cold as ice and frost. She suddenly turned her head and looked at Old Li. She opened her mouth. Her voice was like the clear ringing of a bell in the wind. There was not the slightest bit of dirt. She quietly asked, "Uncle Li? May I ask if there is a table in your room?" Chapter 170. That day was supposed to be a very, very ordinary day in Kunwa City. It was bustling, people coming and going, merchants and goods flourishing. The cultivators were in high spirits, and the ordinary mortals lived in peace and contentment. The big clans in the city were also like this, enjoying the shade under their own big trees, peacefully and leisurely passing every good time. How many years had it been? Hadn't it always been like this? No one had ever thought of changing, and no one was willing to change. The Su family, a big clan in Kunwa City, was also like this. Until that quiet afternoon, when an exceptionally mournful and soul-shaking sharp whistle suddenly appeared in this deep courtyard, as if it had pierced through the heaven and earth and shattered all the tranquility, tearing everything to shreds. Boom! It was a deafening sound. Like a thunderbolt on a clear day, like a thunderstorm, it exploded in this big residence, causing everyone to turn their heads in astonishment, causing the hall to shake, and causing the ground to tremble. Like a tiger's roar breaking through the mountain forest, it swept across the clear sky like an invisible but incomparably swift and violent wave, wildly and ferociously surging in all directions. A table flew into the air. It was a square black wooden table, plain and simple, without too many exquisite and flashy carvings, only deep and heavy. It flew up. A table flew up. The table didn't have any intelligence. If it did, it certainly wouldn't have thought that in its ordinary life, it would unexpectedly have such a brilliant and world-shaking fortuitous encounter. It flew into the air, emitting a deafening sharp whistle, then broke through the sky and flew away. Wherever the flying table passed, it was invincible and unstoppable. People were thrown off their feet, horses were thrown off their feet, trees were toppled over, and walls were split open. Like a fierce tiger descending the mountain, like a divine dragon entering the sea, wild and unruly, with a violent determination, it advanced courageously. Amidst the rumbling sound, dust flew everywhere, and the entire Su residence was in chaos. Screams and cries instantly rang out everywhere. Everyone was overwhelmed with shock, not knowing what had happened. Only that table, alone and proud, flew over the crowd, passed over the gazes, knocked down the trees, and broke through the high walls. It was a flying table. It rushed into the sky and arrived with a rumbling sound. As a result, the sand and stones scattered and heaven and earth resonated with each other. A huge cloud of dust seemed to have condensed into an earth dragon, rumbling from afar. It was like a hot knife through butter. From the depths of the pavilions and courtyards, it forcibly broke open a path to that small courtyard. Finally, in a deafening noise, a large hole was first smashed open in Sumo's courtyard. Then, cracks appeared everywhere, and strange noises were heard. A moment later, in a rumbling noise, an entire wall collapsed with a loud rumble. Dust flew up into the air. Everyone was dumbstruck. They turned their heads to look in that direction, and in the depths of the dust cloud, a faint breeze blew over. A figure slowly walked out from the thick dust cloud. With a long sword on his back, his expression was cold. Like a lonely and proud woman in the world, she stepped through the dust and walked into this place. The air reeked of blood. Su Qingjuan's gaze passed through the shocked crowd and saw Lu Chen lying on the ground. That man seemed to have lost a lot of blood. There seemed to be many wounds on his body. Those wounds looked very deep and heavy. In some places, not only blood and flesh could be seen, but even white bones could be seen. It was a horrible sight, and it made one's hair stand. But for some reason, even with such heavy injuries, the man did not faint. He seemed to still be very conscious. Even if this was an unbearable pain for ordinary people, he would rather endure it than lose his consciousness. Or perhaps, he was already used to this kind of pain. When he turned his head to look in the pool of blood, his gaze met with Su Qingjuan's in the air. He looked at her walking over. He was lying in a pool of blood. There did not seem to be much pain on his face at that moment. He was even in the blood. Facing her, he smiled slightly. That bloody smile was shocking and soul-stirring. It was like a sharp sword piercing into her chest, like a raging fire burning her soul. Su Qingjun held her breath. Her body trembled slightly. She clenched her teeth tightly. Just when she wanted to control herself again, she saw that beside the man lying on the ground, there were those terrifying and twisted instruments of torture scattered all over the ground. Those sharp, twisted and bloody blades. It was as if a sudden clap of thunder had suddenly exploded above her head. It was as if a demonic beast lying dormant in the depths of her heart was roaring. That surge of hot blood rushed to her heart, causing her heart to go blank for a moment. She opened her mouth slightly, as if she wanted to say something. But for some reason, not a single word came out. She could only stare blankly at the man lying in a pool of blood. She clenched her teeth, and a few tears flowed down from the corner of her eyes. Then, like a young child, she used the back of her hand to wipe away the sparkling and dazzling tears on her cheeks. "Hey, Sister June, why have you come?" A voice called out from the front. It was Sumo, who was sitting on the chair in front of the small building. She straightened her body and smiled at Su Qingjun. "Why did you make such a big scene?" "Sister, you are going to tear down our house." "But it doesn't matter. Our house doesn't have anything else but money. You can tear it down however you want. At most, we can just rebuild it again in the future." Su Qingjun glanced at Sumo. Without saying a word, she stepped forward and walked towards Lu Chen. The smile on Sumo's face froze. She looked at Su Qian and Su Wen, who were standing beside her. Su Qian coughed and gave a look to the attendants standing below. After a while, someone came over to greet Su Qingjun. He forced a smile and said, "Eldest miss, look, this is the person that young Master Mo wants. You." "Ah." His voice hadn't even finished resounding in the air when a shrill cry suddenly resounded from his mouth. His entire body suddenly rose from the ground. Su Qingjun had stretched out her hand, grabbed his shirt, and then tossed him away like a rock. The dumbfounded crowd watched as the man in midair drew an arc across half of the courtyard. Then, with a bang, he slammed heavily into the wall that was still standing on the opposite side. In an instant, a clear human imprint was left on the wall. Then, with blood flowing from his mouth and nose, he fell to the ground motionlessly. It seemed that he had fainted. In the small courtyard, there was a sudden silence. After a while, there was suddenly an angry and irritable voice. It was Sumo. She shouted from the front, "What are you doing? Are you trying to show off to me? Don't forget that we are brother and sister." "Brother and sister. Because of an outsider, you caused me to be like this. Is it not enough, you still want to beat me? Come, if you have the guts, then beat me to death. Beat me to death." He roared furiously, like an irritable beast. Su Qingjun looked coldly at him in front of the small building. Her eyes were as cold as snow. She suddenly raised her hand. In this chaotic small courtyard, a clear dragon roar was heard. It was like a ray of autumn water shining into the dust, like a pool of clear water washing the world. A ray of sword light lit up, illuminating her peerless face and reflecting in her clear and bright eyes, emitting a dazzling radiance. The long sword on her back flew out of its sheath. The sword's shadows filled the sky. A strange scene appeared. Under the clear sky, a full moon suddenly appeared in the sky. Cold and lonely, unattainable. The moonlight, like water, fell into the world, illuminating the sword light. The sword blade reflected the moonlight. The moonlight turned into silence. All living things in the world held their breath. Only that light, from the endless vault of heaven, faintly slashed down. It was the moonlight slash. That moment of brilliance seemed to snatch all the years of the world. It was silent. It was like the passing of countless stars, the rising of the sun and setting of the moon. Someone sighed on the other side. The sword light fell, brilliant, stagnated and disappeared. Like the wind and smoke passing by, it disappeared without a trace. Everyone was at a loss. The three Su family brothers in front of the small building were also stunned speechless. They looked at each other and made sure that they were all right. Sumo then heaved a sigh of relief. Just as she was about to speak, suddenly a cracking sound was heard from behind. The three of them turned back in shock. On that incomparably luxurious small building, countless cracks suddenly appeared. Cruelly and coldly smashed all the beautiful splendor, tore all the brick walls and eaves. After a while, suddenly a loud sound was heard. The entire building collapsed. In the flying dust, everyone screamed in fear. The three Su family brothers stumbled, ran, and crawled with all their might, shouting. The people around them were also panicking and rushed up to rescue them. The small courtyard immediately became a mess. In the midst of the chaos, the ancient longsword had already quietly returned to its sheath. Su Qingjun no longer paid attention to the chaos. Through the dust, she walked to Lu Chen's side. Just like at the flying goose platform, she gently squatted down beside him. She looked at his eyes, at the blood that flowed from his body, and at the little smile on his face that should not have been there, but still showed. She suddenly felt that the sword just now, that little bit of sharpness, seemed to have cut her heart. She had thousands of words she wanted to say, but in the end, after her lips slightly trembled a few times, she still only said softly, "Does it hurt?" "It hurts." Lu Chen nodded and smiled. Su Qingjun lowered her head. A teardrop fell into the dust on the ground, wetting a bit of the ground. "You're so old, why are you crying?" Lu Chen said to her. "And it's not your fault." "I'm fine, I won't die." Su Qingjun wanted to laugh, but for some reason, more tears flowed. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, then forced a smile and said, "Why are you pretending to be strong again?" "When I was outside, I heard your cry." Lu Chen said, "I didn't want to scream at first, but then I saw a golden light in the sky. I thought that in the Su family, probably only you, Jean Dan Friar, would come. So I shouted to see if you would come to save me." Su Qingjun nodded and said, "You're so smart." Lu Chen said, "Isn't that so?" Su Qingjun stared at him for a long time, then stretched out her hands, hugged his body, and then softly said in a voice that only Lu Chen could hear, "I'm sorry, I'm late." "It's okay." Lu Chen said. Chapter 171. Warm blood flowed down from his body and quickly dyed her clothes. Her beautiful and clean clothes also seemed to be dyed with a layer of strange blood. However, Su Qingjun did not care about this. She was more concerned that when she wanted to pick up Lu Chen's body, she discovered that there were even deeper and more cruel wounds on his body. She stared blankly for a while and found that it was difficult to make Lu Chen stand on his own. She could only gently put him down. Then, looking at the bloody mess on his body, she said in a low voice, "Wait for me." Then, she stood up and looked around. She walked towards the small courtyard where many attendants, including the 3 Su family brothers, were standing together. The power of the moonlight slash just now was too strong. It had already frightened everyone here, including Sumo, who had not yet recovered. When they saw Su Qingjun walk over, everyone immediately took a few steps back with a look of fear on their faces. Su Qingjun's face was as cold as frost. She pointed at one of the attendants who looked a bit cleaner and said, "Take off your outer clothes." That attendant was stunned for a moment and said in surprise, "What?" Su Qingjun did not say it a second time. She only looked at him coldly. That attendant's legs instantly went soft. He repeatedly said, "Good, good, good." As he said this, he hurriedly took off his outer clothes. He was afraid that if he was a bit slower, his hands and feet would also leave his body like the clothes. Su Qingjun grabbed the outer clothes and walked back to Lu Chen's side. Then, she carefully wrapped his body with the clothes, not letting those bloody wounds be exposed in the dust. Lu Chen smiled and said, "There's no need to go through so much trouble." Su Qingjun looked at him and said in a low voice, "Why didn't you die from the pain?" Lu Chen laughed loudly. But after laughing a few times, his voice twisted like the muscles on his face. He sucked in a breath of cold air. It seemed that he had touched a wound somewhere. Su Qingjun shook her head. There was a trace of worry in her eyes. She used all her strength to help him up. At the same time, she put one of Lu Chen's arms on her shoulder so that most of his body was leaning on her body. Then, she was about to leave. In the eyes of the other people in the small courtyard, this kind of action was like they had seen a ghost. Especially the 3 Su family brothers, their faces were full of shock. Sumo was the first to jump out. But it seemed that her injuries had not healed very well. She tripped and almost fell. Fortunately, she was supported by Su Qian and Su Wen. He barely managed to stand and shouted at Su Qingjun, "Sister, what are you doing? Do you have an affair with this person?" Su Qingjun looked at him coldly and said, "Shut your stinky mouth." Sumo was furious and shouted, "I am your brother from the same father and mother. Why can't I tell you about your affairs?" Su Qingjun stared at Su Mo coldly and said, "If it weren't for the fact that you're my close relative, I would have cut you down with my sword just now based on the heartless evil you've done today. Get lost. You are not allowed to meddle in my affairs in the future." After being glared at by her ice-cold gaze, Su Mo recalled the lonely yet terrifying sword light just now. For a moment, he couldn't muster up the courage to refute her. However, at this moment, an angry voice suddenly came from outside the door, saying, "How dare you? He, as your brother, can't meddle in your affairs. Then what about me, as your mother? Do I have the right to meddle in your affairs?" All the people present were moved and turned to look. Sure enough, they saw a well-maintained woman walking in from the door of the small courtyard. It was Madame Bai, the current madam of the Su family. For a moment, many attendants and servants greeted her. The 3 brothers of the Su family went to greet her. Sumo even limped to Madame Bai and shouted with a little sob, "Mother." Madame Bai patted him gently on the shoulder, her expression overflowing with affection. She then turned to look at the wretched state of the collapsed trees and collapsed walls. Her brows immediately furrowed, and when she looked at Su Qingjun again, her expression was incomparably gloomy. "Jun, don't you have any respect for me?" Under Madame Bai's threatening gaze, Su Qingjun dodged a little at first. But soon, she seemed to have the courage to look straight into her mother's eyes and said, "Mother, I have said that it was my brother's fault today." Madame Bai said angrily, "What did he do wrong? Even if he did something wrong, it's not worth it for you to make such a big fuss. Do you want to tear down our house?" Su Qingjun sneered. She pointed at the frightening torture tools and blades scattered on the ground and said coldly, "Do you see these things? Do you think he made a small mistake when he used these disgusting things to harm people?" She suddenly raised her voice and said loudly, "This is only in our house. If it were in Kunlun Mountain, under the strict rules, what would be waiting for him?" Madame Bai glanced at the torture tools. Suddenly, her face turned pale. Obviously, she was shocked and even a little frightened. Then, as if she thought of something, she glared at Sumo fiercely. Sumo looked as if he had shrunk into a ball. He lowered his head and didn't say a word. Madame Bai gritted her teeth and cursed in a low voice, "I will deal with you later, you unfilial son." As she said this, she took a deep breath and looked at Su Qingjun again. At this moment, the look in her eyes was a little different. She had already faintly felt that this daughter in front of her, the most outstanding genius in the family, seemed to be somewhat different from before. If Mo did something wrong, he will naturally be punished according to the family rules. Even when your father returns home and finds out about this, he will not be spared. Madame Bai looked at Su Qingjun and said gloomily, "But what I want to know is, have you forgotten what I said to you in the front hall?" She seemed to be very, very angry. She stared at Su Qingjun and said word by word, "You don't care about your mother's life at all?" Su Qingjun smiled faintly. There seemed to be some bitterness and helplessness in her eyes. She shook her head gently and said, "Mother, you know it's not like that." Madame Bai said angrily, "Then why don't you listen to me and come here to make a scene?" Su Qingjun supported Lu Chen and began to walk forward slowly. At the same time, she said, "Mother, actually you and I both know that those were just words of anger. You will not die." Madame Bai was so angry that her hand trembled. She pointed at Su Qingjun and said angrily, You disobedient and unfilial daughter." Su Qingjun's expression was a little desolate and lonely. She said, "Have you really touched your own conscience when you speak? For so many years, in the Su family, who is the most filial to you and father besides me? Could it be me, this ruthless and incompetent brother?" She supported Lu Chen and slowly walked to Madame Bai. She lowered her voice and said to her softly, "Besides, how can you bear to die? You care so much about your appearance every day. You take care of it for a few hours every day. What you put on and what you eat are all good things to maintain your appearance. And there are so many young mothers and concubines at home. If they don't die, how can you be willing to take a step first, right?" Madame Bai's face instantly turned pale. She looked at Su Qingjun. Her lips trembled slightly, but for a moment, she couldn't say anything. Su Qingjun walked past Madame Bai and continued to walk forward. After a moment, Madame Bai suddenly cried and shouted to her, all right. You've grown up. I can't control you anymore. When your father comes back, I will tell him about your disobedient appearance today. Let's see if he will be sad. Let's see if he will care about you." Su Qingjun's footsteps paused for a moment. Then, she turned around and looked at her with a strange expression. For a moment, Madame Bai felt uncomfortable under her gaze. She couldn't help but take a step back. Su Qingjun smiled faintly and said, "Mother, don't lie to yourself anymore. Father is much more practical than you. He must know that in the next 10 or even 100 years, who will the Su family really rely on? Will it be me, a 22-year-old Jean Dan friar, or a group of useless brothers? You see, actually, I really understand everything. I can see everything." Su Qingjun said to her quietly. "It's just that I didn't say anything before." The small courtyard was silent. Everyone was intimidated by Su Qingjun's aura. No one dared to step forward to stop her. They just watched as Su Qingjun slowly half-carried and half-supported Lu Chen out of the small courtyard. When they were about to walk out of the door, Lu Chen, who had been leaning on Su Qingjun, suddenly smiled and said in a low voice, "Well said. Oh, it's all right. Very powerful. Very imposing. Isn't this all thanks to you?" Su Qingjun said softly. "Well, it's all because you taught me to flip tables." "Is that so?" "Yes. Then I'm also very powerful." "Is it powerful to be almost beaten to death?" "You really don't know how to chat," Lu Chen said helplessly. That day, many people in Kunwa City saw the light that once again soared into the sky. They saw the ending of Su Qingjun rushing to save Lu Chen. Among them, the people who saw it the most clearly were the onlookers from the beginning to the end of the Su residence. He Gang and Old Ma were the people who stood outside the Su residence from the beginning to the end. But their reactions were completely different. He Gang looked at the light that went far away in the sky. His eyes were full of hatred, as if they were about to spit fire. He gritted his teeth and cursed so loudly that no one could hear him. Then he turned around and left with large strides. I must inform Big Brother about this matter as soon as possible. That bitch was moved by an ant-like odd-job disciple. She must be a fickle person. She's absolutely not worthy of Big Brother. I must warn Big Brother. Moreover, they are both famous geniuses. If there is a fight in the future, it's not like I can't make use of that ant named Lu Chen. Behind He Gang, the slightly plump Old Ma looked like he finally heaved a sigh of relief. His whole body relaxed. But a moment later, when he looked at the Su residence's door again, his gaze changed. It was ice cold with a trace of callousness. Like a wolf or a tiger. Chapter 172. In this world, there are a lot of things that people see on the surface, and then take it for granted that what is going to happen next, or, just by looking at a person's appearance, behavior, and movement, they conclude that this person's nature is what it is. Many times, they are wrong. An ugly person is not necessarily evil, and a beautiful appearance is not necessarily pure. Those who are loyal to righteousness always come from the generation of dog butchers, those who are unfaithful are mostly scholars. In the mortal world, whenever people see one or two beautiful men or women, they will be infatuated and intoxicated, falling head over heels in love with them, thinking that there is nothing their beloved isn't beautiful in every way. And in the Shuxian world, there is no exception. There are always many people who revere and admire the high-level cultivators. Looking at those high and mighty figures, they think that the legendary Jin Dan Friar, Yuanying Jinren, and even the deity transformation stage Jinren are omnipotent. This has nothing to do with cultivation, it is simply human nature. We are too weak, so we are used to looking up at the tall and mighty. We cannot see the tall and mighty's shadow clearly, so we think that the shadow is as tall as a mountain, or even as tall as the sky and the earth, but we forget that everything we see comes from our own vision and vision. When we cannot see too far ahead, we use illusions to fill our own expectations. Su Qingjun is a young genius. At her age, someone who has cultivated to the Jin Dan realm has never appeared in the long history of the Kunlun party. And because of this, almost everyone has high hopes for her, believing that she will become a great person in the future. She was a genuine prodigy, and her talent in cultivation was outstanding. Countless people, especially the disciples whose cultivation is lower than hers, view her as an idol. They revere and admire her, looking up to her as a role model, thinking that she is omnipotent. Unfortunately, the truth is not like this. In this world, the person who understands Su Qingjun the most, naturally, is none other than herself. Of course, Su Qingjun knows that she is not the kind of perfect and omnipotent person that other people imagine her to be. She even clearly knows that she has many shortcomings, and there are many things that she cannot do. However, no one would purposely expose their weaknesses to the public. She was not a saint. In the end, she was just an ordinary mortal. She would feel joy, anger, sorrow, and joy. She would have many concerns and restraints. She even had to consider more things than an ordinary person. This was because in the past, she had to take care of many more people than an ordinary person. Like all geniuses or those who are loved and revered by others, Su Qingjun instinctively hides all of her shortcomings. In order to hide these traces, she would often turn into a calm, cold, beautiful, and aloof appearance. This effect is tried and true. Those who admire her are distanced from her by her actions. They cannot really get close to her. It is as if their eyes can only look at her figure from afar. So what they see in their eyes is a blurry shadow. So they cannot see the truth. So none of them can see the true appearance of that person. So everyone begins to imagine her to be exceptionally beautiful, turning her into the legendary omnipotent and peerless fairy. Just like countless similar things in the world. This has nothing to do with cultivation, it is just human nature. But what is fake is not real. What is impossible will never be true. Like a thin piece of paper that has been soaked in water, it will be pierced by reality. That day, Su Qingjun feels like she is that thin piece of paper that has been soaked in water. When she intimidates the Su family and chases away everyone, including her mother Madame Bai, she brings Lu Chen back to Fian Tai in Kunlun Mountain. The momentum of that moment, the awe-inspiring presence, the resolute words, and the sharp words all make her look so perfect. Even the seriously injured Lu Chen admires her. Until, after she returns to the mountain. She helps Lu Chen back to the hut and puts him down on the bed. Looking at this man who is covered in blood, Su Qingjun panics. Because she does not know how to treat injuries. This was a method that many cultivators, even low-level cultivators with low cultivation and even rogue cultivators were very familiar with, but she didn't know how to do it. Su Qingjun hurriedly brings out a lot of bottles and jars from the cave, which are filled with all kinds of precious herbs and elixirs. Then she looks at Lu Chen who has countless wounds all over his body, and is dumbfounded. As a proud daughter of heaven from a noble family, when has she ever needed to personally deal with this kind of thing? But seeing the urgency of the matter, Su Qingjun does not care too much, and can only do whatever she wants. Therefore, those precious medicinal powders and elixirs are casually smeared on Lu Chen's wounds. She does not know if they have any effect, but the bleeding does stop very quickly. Su Qingjun is immediately happy, and then she grabs a few bottles of famous Kunlun elixirs and stuffs them into Lu Chen's mouth. Cough, cough, cough. Lu Chen, who was pretending to be asleep, coughs violently. He quickly reaches out to block Su Qingjun's medicine bottle, and then weakly says, "Don't worry, I won't die for a while. Let's not talk about whether you can cure me like this, I always feel that I might choke to death." Su Qingjun glares at him, and says, "I am kind enough to give you elixirs, but you talk too much. Are you going to eat it or not?" Lu Chen nodded repeatedly, and says, "I have to, but can I eat it later? Besides, I can't eat so many elixirs at once, or else the medicinal effects will backfire, and it will be no different from poison." Su Qingjun snorts, seems to know that she is a little too hasty, and puts the jade bottles on the table beside her, and says, "You don't know how to appreciate my kindness. I'll leave those things here, you can eat them yourself later. Anyway, you are a mysterious person, and I don't know where you come from. You know a lot of things, and you should know these things, right?" Lu Chen shook his head with some difficulty, and says, "There's no such thing." Su Qingjun sighs, and presses down on his hand, and says, "All right, I was just saying casually, you should rest quickly." After saying that, she pauses for a moment, and her voice becomes a little deeper. She also lowers her head, and says, "This time, you have really suffered a lot. I really didn't expect that my younger brothers at home would be so deranged." A faint glimmer of light flashes in the depths of Lu Chen's eyes, and then he says, "This has nothing to do with you, don't think too much." Su Qingjun still wants to say something, but at this moment, suddenly, a voice comes from outside the thatched hut, and someone suddenly shouted, "Little June, come out." Su Qingjun is startled, and she stands up, and looks a little surprised, and says, "My master is here, and he ran over at this time, what is he doing?" Lu Chen lies on the bed, and smiles, and says, "Probably to help someone plead for leniency." Su Qingjun thinks for a moment, and says, "It's not very likely, my master loves me very much, but he is not very kind to the Su family. In the past, he always told me that those younger brothers and sisters at home are too troublesome, and that I should not be with them." Halfway through her words, Su Qingjun suddenly stops, and Lu Chen says with a smile, "Was he right?" Su Qingjun sighs with a bitter smile, and then she says in a low voice, "You lie here and rest for a while, I'll be back soon." Walking out of the door of the thatched hut, Su Qingjun sees Masato Kihara standing on the Flying Goose Terrace, about 15 feet away from the thatched hut. After seeing her walk out, Masato Kihara also nods in acknowledgement. Su Qingjun quickly walks up to him, and says, "Master, why are you here?" Masato Kihara laughs mischievously, and says, "I heard you were in the limelight in Kunwa City, and when you returned to the Su family, you made a big fuss, and the whole Kunlun mountain is in an uproar, so I hurried over to take a look. Su Qingjun blushes, and she shakes her head and says, "It's not as exaggerated as you say." Masato Kihara chuckles, but he doesn't tease this female disciple anymore. Instead, he glances at the thatched hut, and says, "I heard the person you saved is the part-time disciple Lu Chen who helped you plant the eagle fruit tree?" Su Qingjun nods, and says, "Yes." Masato Kihara looks at her with a smile that doesn't seem like a smile, and says, "In the past, I, your master, have advised you many times to draw a clear line with the people in your family, because it's beneficial to your cultivation, but you never listened. But today, for the sake of an ordinary part-time disciple, you suddenly have a falling out with the Su family. Is there any personal feelings involved?" By the end of his words, Masato Kihara's eyes have already faintly revealed a sharp light, and he just indifferently looks at Su Qingjun. But Su Qingjun seems to be unaware of anything, and she just says with a bitter smile, "Master, when I first became your disciple, I told you that I'm only interested in cultivation, and I'm too lazy to think about other things. Then why did you save him?" Su Qingjun's face darkens, and says, "It's my Su family's brothers who have really gone too far. Even if this person isn't Lu Chen, but just a roadside beggar who has nothing to do with me, I think I probably won't sit idly by." Masato Kihara stares at Su Qingjun for a moment, and suddenly nods, and says, "For you to think like this, it's somewhat beyond my expectations. But don't forget, you can save him for a while, but how can you save him for a lifetime? That Lu Chen's cultivation is low. In the future when he's cultivating on the Kunlun mountain, I'm afraid he'll most likely be attacked by the Su family both openly and covertly." Su Qingjun's expression suddenly turns cold. But Masato Kihara doesn't seem to have the intention to let her off, and only says with a smile, "When that time comes, he's just an ordinary part-time disciple, and he can't really follow you for a lifetime. He and you are people from two completely different worlds, and he has to do all kinds of dirty and tiring work, while you're destined to be a person above others from birth. When that time comes, what will he do?" Su Qingjun grits her teeth, and says, "I've also thought about this. He's not someone who has nothing to do with me." Masato Kihara's eyebrows twitches, and says, "Oh, then I'm curious. He's not related to you in any way, and he's just an ordinary part-time disciple. What relationship does he have with you?" Su Qingjun takes a deep breath, and then says in a loud voice, "Lu Chen is a disciple that I've just accepted." "What?" Masato Kihara is instantly stunned. "Well, congratulations, Master, you've now risen a generation, and become a Grandmaster." Chapter 173. For a famous cultivation sect like the Kunlun party, its inheritance for thousands of years was naturally passed down through the method of passing down from master to disciple. Starting from the two founders, Kun Yuanzi and Tai Luo, the torch was passed down endlessly until today. Therefore, taking in disciples was actually a very normal thing in the Kunlun party. Generally speaking, most cultivators would take in disciples. It was not that there were no cultivators who did not take in disciples, but it was very rare. As for the reason, it was actually very simple. This was just like the inheritance of a family in the human world. The foundation that one had painstakingly laid down all their lives would always be hoped that someone could inherit it. The achievements one had made in the path of cultivation would always be hoped that someone could carry forward it, and at the moment of one's death, most people would always hope that there would be someone by their bedside to take care of them in old age. This was the innate nature of countless people in the vast land of the divine central continent. Whether one was a cultivator or not, or an ordinary person, it was very difficult to jump out of this concern. However, it was also because of this that taking in disciples, especially in a famous and large sect like the Kunlun party, carried another layer of caution. This was because the inheritance of one's path of cultivation was not only related to one's life, it was also related to the growth and decline of the sect's strength. If a mere odd-job disciple jumped out and announced to the world that he would take in one disciple today and another tomorrow, what was the use of teaching the old and young of the sect being trash? Of course, the Kunlun party would not allow this to happen. In fact, in order to allow most of the young disciples to better and more focused on cultivation, the unconventional rule in the Kunlun party was that other than odd-job disciples in the Qi refinement realm and most disciples in the foundation establishment realm were not qualified to take in disciples either. Normally speaking, for the vast majority of cultivators in this world, Jin Dan Friar was the peak that they would never be able to reach in their entire lives. And in the past, the cultivators who were able to cultivate to Jin Dan realm, no matter if it was in terms of cultivation, strength, experience, or talent, they were often outstanding. Therefore, Jin Dan's acceptance of disciples was a boundary drawn by the Kunlun party. Of course, there were still some areas that were unclear because many cultivators were stuck at the foundation realm for their entire lives. When they grew older and reached the peak of the foundation realm, the Kunlun party would give them a way out and allow them to accept some disciples. In short, in the Kunlun party, Jin Dan Friar had the qualifications to accept disciples. And Su Qingjun was precisely the youngest Jin Dan Friar in the past few thousand years of the Kunlun party, this ancient sect. It was just that her talent was really too high and her current age was really too young. So much so that when the vast majority of people, including her master, Masato Kihara, were exclaiming in joy and admiration for her cultivation, they subconsciously forgot that Su Qingjun already had this kind of unconventional qualification to take in disciples. You accept disciples? Masato Kihara looked to be in a daze, as if he had yet to wake up from his disciples' words. Su Qingjun very calmly nodded her head and said, "Yes, master, I think I have this qualification right?" Masato Kihara thought for a moment and suddenly realized that his disciple was really right. This discovery made his old face turn black. He paced back and forth a few steps in front of Su Qingjun and murmured, but this is too that. He suddenly raised his head, frowned and looked at Su Qingjun, said, "You yourself are only 22 years old, do you know?" Su Qingjun said, "I know." "Then why do you still accept disciples?" Su Qingjun sternly said, "Among the ancestors of our Kunlun party, which one of them has ever issued a decree saying that the 22 years old Jin Dan Friar is not allowed to accept disciples?" I really don't think so." Masato Kihara touched his head in distress and said, "But there wasn't a genius like you in the past." Su Qingjun snorted and said, "Master, you can't have the meaning of blaming me because of my talent." I won't. Masato Kihara hurriedly denied, but then he frowned in distress and said, "But this doesn't feel too good, June girl." This matter certainly seemed a bit strange. Generally speaking, most of the young people at Su Qingjun's age were still in the Qi refining realm, or at most the foundation building realm. Even if there were some young geniuses like her in the whole world, they were often so young that they were completely focused on their cultivation. In their eyes, there was only the higher Yuanying realm and the legendary deity transformation realm. Who would be distracted to accept disciples? Even if they wanted to accept disciples, shouldn't they wait until they were 50 or 60 years old, when most of their potential was exhausted and the upper limit of their future was already in sight? Masato Kihara naturally raised his doubts, hoping to pull this obedient female disciple of his back from the crooked path. Who knew that on this day, Su Qingjun was exceptionally stubborn. She said she wanted to accept disciples and she would accept disciples, refusing to give in at all. Just as the two of them were arguing, and Masato Kihara was beginning to get angry from embarrassment, they heard a sudden loud noise from behind the mountain peak in the distance. Then, several beams of light shot up into the sky, illuminating the heaven and earth. Not long after, they swayed and danced, turning into the image of a dragon and a tiger. They were so dazzling that people couldn't look at them directly. Masato Kihara's expression suddenly changed slightly. She looked at the strange light in the sky for a moment, then said to Su Qingjun, "We'll talk about this later." Then she leaped up and flew toward the place where the strange light was shooting up into the sky. Su Qingjun was also shocked by the strange light. Although the flying goose platform was very far away, she could still feel the waves of abundant and unstoppable spiritual power of heaven and earth, like an invisible whirlpool, crazily surging toward the place where the light was rising. This was the scene that all cultivators in the world yearned for even in their dreams. Someone had broken through the great life and death juncture. Breaking through the great illusion, seeing the great joy, obtaining supreme magic power, understanding the mysteries of the world, seeing through the true meaning of Taoism, ascending to the sky in one step, and becoming a superior person. It was becoming a perfected being. This day was full of ups and downs. It seemed that one thing followed another, and each one was bigger and more important than the last. It was simply too much for the eyes to take in. At first, in Kunwa City, the people of the Su family kidnapped people in the downtown area, attracting onlookers. Then, the scene suddenly changed. The genius girl of the Su family, Jean Dan, came and caused a disturbance in the Su family, causing a sensation in the whole city. Then, what happened next made the things that happened in Kunwa City instantly dim. After 11 years, the light of proving true appeared on the mountain of Kunlun again. The 5,000-year-old Kunlun finally had a great perfected being in the Yuanying realm. Apart from the extremely small number of deity transformation stage perfected beings who were endowed with extraordinary talent and great luck, perfected beings of the Yuanying realm were almost the pinnacle of human cultivators' achievements on the path of cultivation. When one reached the level of the Yuanying realm, one's talent was no longer completely determined by one's innate talent. Opportunities, luck, external forces, and various spiritual materials and resources were almost inexhaustible. Only then could there be hope to create an incomparably powerful perfected being of the Yuanying realm. The great life and death juncture, which made people's expressions change at the mention of its name, was like a thunderclap reverberating in the ears of the cultivation world. It was also the most famous abyss. Many geniuses failed in this place and fell into the yellow spring when they were only one step away from the peak of their life. The significance of a perfected being of the Yuanying realm could never be overestimated. This was also the case for a famous sect like the Kunlun party. Although among the 5 great sects of Zhengxianmeng, deity transformation stage perfected beings were the face, the wind, and the strong guarantee, under normal circumstances, unless it was a matter of life and death for the sect, deity transformation stage perfected beings absolutely wouldn't make a move. Naturally, there were all kinds of connections, restraints, and restrictions. However, perfected beings of the Yuanying realm were the foundation of a great sect. This couldn't be wrong. When the light of confirming reality soared into the sky, not only did the entire Kunlun mountain instantly stir, even the big and small places outside of Kunlun mountain held their breaths. The people in Kunwa City also instantly forgot about the previous liveliness. Each and every one of them gazed at the strange light in the depths of the mountain, which was connected to the sky. The head of the Kunlun party, Idle Month, quickly rushed over from Tianquan Peak. Before he arrived, there were already 7 or 8 perfected beings standing in the air, looking down at the 3 Zhangtal mountain below. Yes, the light of confirming reality was emitted from that immortal's cave. It was Xian's master, Dongfang Tao. After perfected person Idle Month, other perfected beings of the Kunlun party, Yuanying perfected beings, rushed over one after another. The friendship of fellow disciples was one thing, but those who achieved the perfected being realm knew more about the hardships and dangers than ordinary people. It was indeed worthy of great joy and celebration. In addition, there was another meaning that could only be understood. The moment one became a perfected being, the light of confirming reality would soar into the sky and produce all kinds of special illusions, which could somewhat reflect the accomplishments of the perfected being's cultivation technique and the level of his cultivation. Although it couldn't be too accurate, this light of confirming reality couldn't deceive people. At the very least, it would give people an idea. Before long, in the sky outside the 3 Zhangtal mountain, many silhouettes appeared near and far. They silently and concernedly looked at the immortal's cave and the light of confirming reality. At the foot of the mountain, there were also many people rushing over one after another. Xian stood at the very front, just outside Dongfang Tao's immortal's cave. Her eyes were full of surprise and expectation. She looked at the strange scene over there without blinking. Beside her, Melaleuca japonica had a face full of emotion. Her expression was somewhat complicated as she looked at the immortal's cave. Other than them, there were also many people from the Kunlun party who were attracted over. Of course, among them, there couldn't be people with low cultivation. For example, the odd job disciples wouldn't join in the fun. Those people with innate talents didn't even have the qualifications to see the light of confirming reality. It was better for them to honestly go back to work. Somewhere in the sky above the Three Zhangtal mountain, the head of the heavenly soldier hall, Du Kanjinren, stood on the clouds with an indifferent expression. Beside him, He Yi's expression was calm, but his expression was slightly complicated as he looked at the strange light that could pierce through the sky and the earth. After a moment, Du Kanjinren's voice came from the front. He said, "If you must go and ask him, be careful. Old man Dongfang's temper isn't good." "Yes, disciple understands." Chapter 174. The majestic Kunlun Mountains were undulating. Even in broad daylight, there would always be shadows, and there would always be places where the sun could not shine. The martyr's grave was such a place that seemed to be forever hidden in the darkness. When the dazzling spiritual light shone upon the mountains, everyone gasped in admiration. The light came from far and near, but it did not fall on the back of the dark mountain, unable to shine into the shadows. The corpse stood silently in the dark courtyard, looking up at the light in the sky and the faintly discernible dragon and tiger phenomenon. It galloped unhindered, arrogant, and symbolized the greatest power in the world. After a long while, he turned around and walked into the darkness without a sound, like a lonely ghost left behind in the mortal world. The divine light of testimony was a rare cultivation phenomenon. Many cultivators would not be able to see it even once in their lives if it was not for a fortuitous encounter, let alone a regular person. That was why, although Lu Chen was heavily injured, Su Qingjun helped him sit up in the straw hut on Flying Goose Terrace. She leaned against the window sill and looked out at the strange light in the sky. Su Qingjun sat by his side and supported him. For some reason, both she and Lu Chen seemed to be unperturbed despite the fact that their identities, positions, and abilities were worlds apart. When she saw the divine light of testimony in the sky, Su Qingjun could not help but feel excited. Even for a publicly acknowledged genius like her, the Yuanying realm was still a distant goal. There was still a long way to go. Not to mention the legendary Great Gate of Life and Death where geniuses would die prematurely. No one could be certain that they could pass it. When she collected her excitement and calmed down, Su Qingjun quickly noticed that Lu Chen's expression was a little too calm as he gazed at the mystical light in the distance. For a lowly errand disciple, the wondrous scene that appeared right now was very likely a realm that he would never be able to reach in his entire life. However, even though Lu Chen looked at it very seriously, he did not seem to be excited at all. He seemed to be calmer than Su Qingjun, like an indifferent and ordinary person. "What's wrong?" Su Qingjun asked Lu Chen. She was a little concerned, but also a little curious. Lu Chen replied. Su Qingjun pointed at the light in the sky and said, "You don't seem to be too interested in the divine light of testimony." Lu Chen was startled for a moment. Then, he smiled and sighed. "Eldest miss, if you had dozens of wounds on your body like I do right now, the pain would be excruciating, and you would want to faint immediately. You wouldn't be able to lift your spirits for other things." Su Qingjun gave it some thought and agreed. She sighed softly and said, "I was careless." As she spoke, she helped Lu Chen lie down again and said in a low voice, "You should rest well." Lu Chen looked at her face and suddenly said, "What you said outside before, were you serious?" Su Qingjun said, "What?" Lu Chen said, "Of course, when you announced to your master that you wanted to accept me as a disciple." "Ah, you heard it?" Lu Chen closed his eyes and said, "Your voice was not low at that time." Su Qingjun smiled and said, "I was serious." Lu Chen sighed and said, "Can I refuse this matter?" "What?" Su Qingjun was shocked. It was clear that Lu Chen's reaction was beyond her expectations. Lu Chen didn't say anything and only calmly looked at her. After a moment, Su Qingjun frowned and asked, "Why?" Lu Chen said, "Your master was not happy." Su Qingjun nodded and said, "Are you afraid of him?" Lu Chen said, "Your master is spiritual master Yuanying and I am an odd job disciple. Do you think I should not be afraid of him?" Su Qingjun was silent. After a while, she softly said, I clearly only want to accept a disciple. Your identity is not the same. Lu Chen somewhat helplessly interrupted her words and said, Your talent is too good. Everyone has placed too much hope on you, especially your master. So he will definitely not allow anything that could delay your cultivation to happen. Moreover, I am older than you. Su Qingjun was startled and said, You still care about this? Lu Chen smiled bitterly and said, You know I am thick-skinned. Of course I don't care about this. But other people care. You are a 22-year-old young lady and you accepted a man who is several years older than you as a disciple. Moreover, his talent is very poor. What do you want other people to think? Su Qingjun coldly snorted and a trace of anger flashed across her face. But she didn't say anything. Lu Chen sighed and said, Of course, others would only think that you're possessed, or perhaps you're young and insensible, and you've been seduced and bewitched by others. Then no one will come to find trouble with you. But if you really accept me as a disciple, I am afraid that the entire Kunlun mountain will not be pleasing to the eye. When that time comes, do you think I can live long? Su Qingjun looked deeply at Lu Chen and suddenly said, Your current reaction is completely different from what I originally thought. Lu Chen said, Oh, then what did you originally think? Su Qingjun said, I thought that if I told you about this, you would jump 3 feet high and be elated and in disbelief. Then you would cry bitterly and kneel in front of me, hugging my feet and calling me master. Lu Chen raised his hand with some difficulty and scratched his head. He smiled and said, It seems that it should be like this. Well, yes, I have already prepared to kick you away. Su Qingjun said calmly. The corner of Lu Chen's mouth revealed a trace of a smile. He looked at Su Qingjun's beautiful face. After a moment, he gently nodded and said, Thank you. You are welcome. In the end, Lu Chen ultimately did not become the disciple of the Kunlun party's youngest genius, Jin Dan Su Qingjun. This title, which was enough to make all the younger generation disciples drool, was far away from him. However, probably in order to make up for the harm that Lu Chen suffered this time, and also to better protect him from being targeted and framed by her own family in the future, under Su Qingjun's insistence, Lu Chen still obtained the title of a nominal disciple. The title of nominal disciple was very different from the official disciple who formally entered the sect. Basically, it could be seen as a kind of exchange of favors. For example, a certain cultivator with profound cultivation accidentally owed a favor, but this favor was not enough for him to accept a disciple and teach him. Therefore, there was this kind of compromise method and title. Generally speaking, a nominal disciple could not obtain the master's Dao inheritance. It was nothing more than a topic that could be used to brag on normal days, and an excuse to pretend to be fat at one's own cost in times of crisis. Of course, with this title, others could not recklessly bully him. Otherwise, who would know if that master's mood was good or not? If he angered a great cultivator and came to find trouble, wouldn't he be in big trouble? Therefore, this method was equivalent to Su Qingjun giving Lu Chen a talisman. It was equivalent to indirectly telling the people outside that although this handyman disciple was a waste, he was now a nominal disciple of Su Qingjun. They could not casually bully him anymore, otherwise, she might be angry and not be polite. For the final result, Masato Kihara did not have any objection. He had seen a lot of nominal disciples, and they were not considered real disciples at all. As long as it did not affect Su Qingjun's cultivation and reputation, he was too lazy to care about the trivial matters of the Su family. But even so, with Su Qingjun's current reputation in Kunlun Mountain, suddenly having a nominal disciple, even if it was just a handyman disciple, was still very sensational. Logically speaking, this matter should have been a little troublesome, and people would talk about it for a while. But fortunately, during this period, the matter of Dongfang Tao becoming a spiritual master Yuanying was too important. Very soon, it overwhelmed all other trivial matters, allowing Su Qingjun and Lu Chen to breathe a sigh of relief. After Dongfang Tao's divine light of verification appeared, it meant that he had truly broken through the great life and death barrier, and become a spiritual master Yuanying. However, he did not immediately come out of the cave residence, but continued to cultivate in seclusion for more than half a month. Most people could understand this. The Yuanying realm was unusually strong, and it was equivalent to being reborn. After breaking through the great life and death barrier, it was normal for one's aura to be unstable and his foundation to be unstable, and he needed a period of time to stabilize it. And for cultivators, especially high-level cultivators, the safest place in the world was, of course, the cave residence where they cultivated in seclusion. Half a month later, Dongfang Tao successfully came out of seclusion. At that time, most of the Kunlun party's Yuanying Jinren and Jin Dan Friar were present to congratulate him. Even Lord Tianlan, who was not in Kunlun Mountain, sent someone to send a congratulatory message. Among the people present to congratulate him, of course, the leader, Spiritual Master Idol Month, was the leader. At that time, on the 30 Zhang Peak, there were as many Zenrens as there were clouds, and Jin Dan Jinren could be seen everywhere. It could be said to be a gathering of prosperity for a moment, and it was also a rare display of high-level cultivators for the Kunlun party. It once again revealed to the world the unfathomable strength of the majestic Kunlun. After Dongfang Tao came out of the cave, he was full of energy, and his eyes were shining. He was full of satisfaction, and he laughed 3 times towards the blue sky. Next to him, Exian had already rushed over excitedly, and hugged him with great joy. Dongfang Tao laughed loudly, and then nodded and smiled at Melaleuca japonica beside him. Then, he strode towards where Spiritual Master Idol Month was. A gift of gratitude was still necessary. If there were no sects, there would not be so many spiritual materials and resources. If there were no sects, there would not be such a stable and peaceful cultivation environment. These words, everyone knew in their hearts. Dongfang Tao quickly approached, and just as he was about to greet, he was suddenly startled. He saw that among the group of Yuanying Jinren in front, Spiritual Master Idol Month was standing at the forefront, smiling and nodding at him. However, in front of everyone else, there was another person standing next to Spiritual Master Idol Month. It was a little girl who seemed to be only a little over 10 years old. Her face was calm, like the snowstorm on the winter peak, cold and slightly chilly. Chapter 175. On the day that Dongfang Tao became a perfected person and walked out of his cave residence, most of the important figures in the Kunlun party were present. Although the 2 highest-ranking perfected cultivators in the divine transformation realm did not come in person, they sent someone to send a congratulatory message. Perfected cultivator Tianlan's message was sent by perfected Qian Deng of Baichao Tang. Everyone in the Kunlun party already knew that perfected Qian Deng and perfected cultivator Tianlan had a close relationship, so no one was surprised. On the other hand, Hakushin Jinkuan sent a 10-year-old girl, who was, of course, White Lotus. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, White Lotus stood beside perfected cultivator Idol Month, in front of all the other perfected cultivators. Of course, this was a very meaningful thing, but there was enough reason to tell others about it, because White Lotus was holding the wind's speech plate in her arms at that time. Hakushin Jinkuan used this treasure as a medium, which was equivalent to directly congratulating Dongfang Tao, so the meaning was naturally different. However, from that day on, everyone in the Kunlun party finally realized that in his old age, Hakushin Jinkuan regarded this 10-year-old genius girl, who was said to be a once-in-a-thousand-years genius, as his most valued successor. And because of this, there was another person that people had not noticed before, but now privately attracted attention again. It was the other incomparably powerful perfected cultivator in the divine transformation realm in the Kunlun party, who had not had a successor for many years. What on earth was that bald perfected cultivator thinking? How would I know what the damn baldy is thinking? Lu Chen raised his head and drank a mouthful of wine, then complained to old Ma, anyway, what I know is that he is the most unreliable person in the world. Old Ma patted his shoulder and comforted him, you have suffered a lot this time. I understand that you are depressed. Believe me, he is not feeling good either. Lu Chen squinted at him, his face full of doubt and disbelief. What's wrong with you, Baldy? Old Ma said sternly, when he heard about this, especially when he heard that you gritted your teeth and endured it for the sake of the big picture, that you would rather be humiliated and seriously injured than do anything. He flew into a rage and angrily scolded the Su family for being bastards. He asked me to tell you that he will remember everything that happened today. Once he succeeds in the future, you don't even need to say anything. When he comes back, he will first start with the Su family. He will kill those blind trash to vent your anger. Bullsh *T. Lu Chen scolded. You've been talking for a long time, but you still won't budge. What was the use of that? If you have the guts, you can ask Baldy to go to the Su family now. With his ability, destroying the Su family is as easy as crushing a bug. Why would he waste so much time talking? Old Ma suddenly looked embarrassed. He smiled bitterly and said, Immortal is in a different position from us. He has more fetters, so he really can't do whatever he wants. As he said this, his face became serious and he promised Lu Chen again, anyway, don't worry. Immortal has said again and again that this matter is not over. He will remember what happened to the Su family. Sooner or later, he will make trouble for them. Lu Chen rolled his eyes, with an expression that said, I am not a fool to believe you. Old Ma also laughed and quickly changed the topic. He said with a smile, okay, let's not talk about this. Anyway, that is what Immortal said. We will know in the future. By the way, are your injuries better? Lu Chen stretched his arm and said, I think they're almost healed. Otherwise, I wouldn't have come down the mountain to drink with you. Old Ma nodded and said, your injuries are recovering really fast. Although most of your cultivation has been crippled, at least your foundation is still there in terms of recovery. You can't even compare to a foundation-building cultivator, let alone an aura refinement disciple. Lu Chen was startled, but he soon nodded and said, I probably swindled a lot of panaceas from Su Qingjun these days. They're still somewhat useful. Old Ma looked at him enviously and said, look at your life, it's too comfortable. Other people work themselves to death to save the beauty, but you just lie there and let the beauty save the black bear. You eat other people's food, use other people's things, and now you're even living outside other people's immortal's cave, right? He let out a long sigh and said with a bleak expression, what a pity, the world is so unfair. I, Ma Xiaoyun, have been an elegant young man for so many years, but why haven't any outstanding women taken a fancy to me? Have all the flowers been stuck in cow dung? Stuck my ass. Lu Chen scolded him without the slightest trace of politeness and said, just lie there and let other people cut you dozens of times for me to see. Is that comfortable? Why are you pretending to be young? You're still an elegant young man. Wake up, it's been several decades, and you've never lost any weight. You've always been like a pig. If it wasn't because that damn Baldy was fatter than you, I would have thought you were the reincarnation of a pig immortal. Even if there were flowers, they definitely wouldn't be stuck in your head. Old Ma's expression turned serious. He pointed at Lu Chen and shouted, I heard you, you called True Monarch the reincarnation of a pig immortal. So what if I called him? What do you want? Lu Chen glared at him. Oh, nothing. Your voice is the loudest, you're the best. Pretend I didn't say anything, Old Ma said calmly. How's the situation on the mountain? Old Ma asked as he poured him a glass of wine. Lu Chen took the wine glass and said, it's all right. The main thing is that Dongfang Tao suddenly became a true monarch. This matter was very sensational and attracted everyone's attention. Plus, I didn't really become Su Qingjuan's disciple, so it's not too conspicuous. Old Ma snorted and said, this time it's really an undeserved disaster. I was disgusted by those 3 Su families' trash. To be honest, if you hadn't stopped me with your gaze that day, I wouldn't have been able to hold it in. Lu Chen smiled and said, it's nothing. It's not worth it to ruin our big plan for those things. Old Ma hesitated for a moment, but lowered his voice and whispered to Lu Chen, oh right, I've always wanted to ask you. Although you endured it that day, we didn't know that those guys actually hid such disgusting torture tools and made you suffer so much. But if Su Qingjun really didn't come, would you really endure it to the end? Lu Chen turned his head and looked at Old Ma. After a moment, he slowly shook his head and said, I won't. Then you're going to fall out with them? Old Ma asked. When they made their move that day, I had already made my decision. Once their attacks reached the point where my bones and muscles were injured and my life was in danger, I couldn't care so much anymore. I couldn't really wait for death to come, so I naturally had to make a move. Well, I think so too. Old Ma nodded, but then he glanced at Lu Chen. There seemed to be a trace of lingering fear in his eyes. He said, at the beginning, you suffered such a serious injury and were cut so many times by those trash. I thought you would have been unable to endure it. Lu Chen smiled as he swept his gaze across his body. Beneath his clothes, countless scars could be vaguely seen on his flesh. He was silent for a moment and then said lightly, after being burned by the black flame for 10 years, I seem to have gotten used to the pain. Old Ma didn't say anything and just nodded silently. What do you plan to do next? Old Ma asked Lu Chen. Lu Chen stretched and said, what else can I do? Continue to live and then secretly find a spy. What should be done has to be done. Oh right, help me find some information. What information? The daily routine, whereabouts, and preferences of the younger generation of the Su family. The more detailed, the better. Old Ma's eyes lit up. There was a trace of excitement on his face. He whispered, what's wrong? You can't stand it anymore? Lu Chen sneered and said, I'm not a saint. Do I have to bear it silently after being dealt with like this? No, I can't stand it. Well said. Old Ma slapped his thigh. The smile on his face suddenly seemed to have a bit of fierceness. He gritted his teeth and said, isn't it like this? In our line of work, let's compete with each other. Who's afraid of who? Speaking of this, he paused for a moment and hesitated. He said to Lu Chen, but it has only been less than a month. If you immediately retaliate, will it attract attention and implicate you? Lu Chen said indifferently, I endured it that day, so I naturally won't act rashly for the sake of taking revenge. However, I can't let this matter go just like this. I have to find an opportunity to get it back and let them taste the true pain of this world. Old Ma looked at his face and frowned. He seemed to feel a trace of coldness. But soon his face returned to normal. He said, no problem. Anyway, I don't like these people. Don't worry about the information. I'll give it to you next time you go down the mountain. We brothers will kill them. Lu Chen hummed in acknowledgement and stood up, looking like he was about to leave. Old Ma seemed to suddenly think of something. He suddenly said to him, by the way, if you make up your mind to do this, what about Su Qingjun? Lu Chen paused and then said, what's there to worry about? She won't know that I did it. Old Ma nodded and said, well, that's true. If we do it secretly, we won't be afraid of being known by others. But, I'm just asking casually. I'm a little curious. You said that the Su family is naturally hateful. It's not a big deal if we kill them. But I heard that Su Qingjun is a good woman. She is also very good to you. For you, she not only quarreled with her family, but also flipped the table and smashed the wall. She beat her younger brother. In order to take care of you on Mount Kunlun, she gave you the title of a nominal disciple. Lu Chen raised his eyes and quietly looked at Old Ma. Old Ma's voice became softer and softer. After a while, Lu Chen suddenly asked, what do you want to say? Old Ma said, I want to ask you. Don't you care about her feelings? I was injured and suffered. I want to take revenge. Why should I care about her feelings? But between the two of you, aren't there some, at least mutual appreciation? Lu Chen's eyes were slightly lowered, like a shadow swaying in the dark. He looked at the light in the distance with no expression. After a while, he said lightly, we are shadows. How can we be qualified to talk about love? You think too much. He turned around and walked out. At the same time, his voice carried a bit of coldness. He said, help me find out information about those people. When I do it myself, I think you may be a little relieved and no longer have any doubts. Old Ma stood still and watched Lu Chen walk out of the door alone. After a while, a smile suddenly appeared on his face. But the smile was a bit desolate and bleak. Chapter 176. Dongfang Tao, who had achieved the great cause of Yuanying Enlightened Master, could now be said to be an influential figure in the Kunlun party. He was an important figure that everyone in the sect paid close attention to. After all, it had been 11 years since the last Yuanying Enlightened Master of the Kunlun party was born. All kinds of welcoming and sending off, as well as all kinds of red tape, re-establishing his position and authority in the sect, all matters naturally fell into place. According to the rules of the Kunlun party, as long as one cultivated to the level of Yuanying Enlightened Master, he would be qualified to set foot on the 4 extraordinary peaks in the sky and clouds, the core of the Kunlun party, to cultivate. At the same time, Yuanying Enlightened Master's Immortals Cave in the mountains would also be preserved. After these matters came to an end, Dongfang Tao formally held a ceremony to let Xian enter the sect as his master. She could be regarded as the first personal disciple he had ever accepted. After the news spread, the entire Kunlun mountain was in an uproar, especially among the various aristocratic families in Kunwa City, who reacted even more strongly. Although this news was heard by well-informed people, at that time, Dongfang Tao was at most a veteran Jin Dan friar. Later, when he was injured and went into closed-door meditation for a long time, his reputation became even weaker and almost no one had any scruples about him. But who would have thought that this old man would amaze the world with a single brilliant feat? After going into closed-door meditation for a long time, he unexpectedly produced a Yuanying Enlightened Master, which really caught people unprepared. Overnight, the prices of the small E family in Kunwa City skyrocketed. After all, Xian was now Dongfang Tao's only disciple. If nothing unexpected happened, she would very likely inherit Dongfang Tao's orthodoxy in the future. A powerful Yuanying Enlightened Master standing behind him was already enough to deter many influential families in this city. After formally becoming his disciple, Xian's status in the Kunlun party naturally rose to the sky in a single bound. Soon, she moved out of the fragrance garden and lived in the 30 Peak. When Dongfang Tao went to cultivate in the clouds in the future, this mountain cave would belong to Xian. There were still a lot of things to do in the following days. There seemed to be an endless stream of people coming to congratulate him and make friends with him. From cultivation sects to influential clans in Kunwa City, from big shops to cultivation sects and forces of various sizes around the Kunlun party, all of them sent people to greet him and make friends with him. Xian has really broadened her horizons. She only feels that the cultivation world in front of her seems to have opened a wider door. However, during this time, the pair of master and disciple on the 30 feet peak welcomed a special guest. When the young man handed the visiting card to Xian and waited patiently with a smile on his face, Xian had a strange feeling in her heart. On the name card, there were 2 words, He. When Dongfang Tao received the visiting card from Xian, he was also a bit surprised. He had been out of closed-door meditation for a long time, so he naturally knew some things he should know, such as the matter that happened to Xian that caused a sensation in the cultivation sect. Dongfang Tao was naturally unhappy about the fact that his beloved disciple had almost been disgraced and almost disfigured. To be exact, he was furious and furious. However, the main culprit of this matter, He Gang, had already been dealt with and expelled from the Kunlun party. This punishment was very harsh in the cultivation world, so even Dongfang Tao couldn't say anything about it. Although He was He Gang's elder brother, he almost didn't do anything wrong in this matter. On the other hand, He's status was absolutely not something an ordinary disciple, He Gang, could compare to. He himself was a talented disciple who was highly valued by the cultivation sect. At such a young age, he had already cultivated to the peak of the foundation building realm. It was very likely that in the near future, he would become a Jin Dan friar. At that time, he would be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with Su Qingjun, who was currently in the limelight, and become a true genius who had the hope of peeking into the Yuanying realm or even the deity transformation stage. Not to mention, He was not alone. Standing behind him was the powerful Yuanying spiritual master, Du Kong. The heavenly soldier hall was also very powerful in the sect. If it was still the Jin Dan friar, the temperamental and easily angered Dongfang Tao might have gotten angry and directly chased He away. However, after cultivating to the Yuanying spiritual master, he seemed to have suddenly become a bit timid. Thus, he ordered Xian to invite He in to meet him. The atmosphere when they met was a bit awkward. There was no so-called meeting to forget enmity with a smile, and there was no amiable, happy, and polite scene. Dongfang Tao was indeed an old man with a strange temper. Although he suppressed his anger and didn't target He, his pair of bright eyes stared at He from head to toe. This was not a good sign. Fortunately, He didn't seem to care about this. He maintained a calm smile for a long time. Only when Dongfang Tao opened his mouth to ask questions did he answer them one by one. His attitude was always modest and courteous, neither servile nor overbearing. He even maintained an extremely elegant and courteous attitude towards Xian. It was difficult not to have a good impression of such a person. Even Xian was no exception. In the process of meeting Dongfang Tao, He said many things. Among them, there were some messages from his master, Dukanjinren. The main idea was that Dukanjinren would personally come over in a few days to bring Dongfang Tao to the strange peak between the clouds in the sky. He would also tell him about some of the special features of the mountain. This was obviously a favor, and it was a favor that was hard to refuse. With Dongfang Tao's temperament, his expression softened when he looked at He. He even praised him a few times. Before leaving, He whispered a few words to Dongfang Tao while Xian was packing up the tea set. Dongfang Tao's expression changed slightly, but he didn't reply. When he looked at He again, the expression in his eyes was different. After He left, Dongfang Tao pondered for a long time. When Xian passed by, he called out to her and said, "Xian, do you still remember the matter with Gang?" Xian was startled for a moment. She didn't expect her master to suddenly mention this matter again. She immediately said, "That matter? I can't say I've forgotten it now. When I saw Senior Marshal Brother He just now, I actually felt strange." Dongfang Tao nodded. After a moment of silence, he said to Xian, "If they deliberately harmed you, I will naturally stand up for you. You don't need to be afraid. But since the past is in the past, you don't need to keep it in your heart. You don't need to hold a grudge against He. Yes, your disciple understands." Xian nodded in agreement. She then glanced at Dongfang Tao and said, "Master, from what you've said, could it be that you have an opinion about this Senior He? It's best if you don't provoke this person." Dongfang Tao said lightly. "You're saying that I can live here in the future?" Lu Chen's expression was a little surprised. Su Qingjun smiled and said, "Yes, the Flying Goose Terrace is quite big. Moreover, I have always wanted to find someone to help me cultivate some precious spiritual herbs. It's a pity that I haven't been able to find someone who I can trust, who has the ability to cultivate, and who is willing to work hard. So now that I've finally caught one, I can't let you run away so easily." Lu Chen clicked his tongue and then said, "Is it really okay for me to live on the Flying Goose Terrace? Won't others gossip?" Su Qingjun said lightly, "Aren't you my disciple in name? Just think of it as me squeezing you dry and making you work for free." The situation she was talking about was not uncommon in the Kunlun sect. Some high-level cultivators would often take in nominal disciples, but they didn't pass on their skills and techniques. Instead, they would just give some spiritual materials and resources or basic techniques as a reward, and then have people specially cultivate important spiritual materials for them. Of course, Lu Chen had also heard about this. However, Su Qingjuan's words were of course a joke. He also laughed, then extended 2 fingers and said, "I can move here, but I have 2 conditions." Su Qingjun was stunned for a moment, then she looked a little annoyed and said, "Hey, do you know how many people in the entire Kunlun party have racked their brains to live here? You just have to be the most troublesome person. How dare you mention conditions to me?" Yes, what you said is very reasonable. Lu Chen nodded repeatedly and said, 2 conditions, do you want to hear them? Humph. Speak. First, I don't want to live in this straw hut anymore, Lu Chen said. Su Qingjun was stunned for a moment and immediately became vigilant. She said, hey, don't push your luck. You want to live in my cave abode? That's absolutely impossible. Lu Chen laughed and said, what a joke. Do I look like that kind of person? I always feel that you do. You misunderstood. Lu Chen glared at Su Qingjun, then pointed to the forest behind him and said, I want to live in a wooden hut. I will cut firewood and build a house myself. It will be bigger and stronger, so that it won't be so easily destroyed. Is that okay? Su Qingjun's cheeks were slightly red, and she softly muttered, narrow-minded, stingy. Huh? What did you say? Oh, nothing. You can build a wooden hut. Later, when I have time, I can also cut down 2 big trees for you. Su Qingjun said seriously. Lu Chen nodded and said, second, I want to raise a dog. What? Su Qingjun was stunned for a moment and almost thought that she had heard it wrong. Lu Chen turned around and whistled loudly. A moment later, a woof woof sound could be heard. A black shadow ran out from the forest and rushed to Lu Chen's side. It was Tu, who was dilly-dallying with him in a very intimate manner. Why is there so many wounds on this dog's body? When Su Qingjun saw the appearance of Atsu, she also gasped. Lu Chen sighed with a sorrowful expression. He said to Su Qingjun, this is an old dog that I've raised for more than 10 years. It's been with me through life and death situations. It's covered in wounds, and it's about to reach the end of its life. I really don't want to be separated from it. Can you do me a favor? Su Qingjun looked at Atsu with sympathy. When she was about to say yes, she suddenly felt a little strange. She frowned and said, but I don't think this dog is old. It is quite energetic. Lu Chen said calmly, this native dog is very young. Really? Well, don't just look at how lively it is. Who knows, it might suddenly die in a few days. Su Qingjun was stunned for a moment and quickly waved her hand. Forget it, it is just a dog. Let it stay. You don't have to curse it like this. Lu Chen laughed and said, thank you very much, Atsu, thank you. Before he finished speaking, he suddenly stopped. Lu Chen and Su Qingjun turned their heads at the same time. They saw that Atsu, who was still circling around Lu Chen, suddenly sneaked to the side of the mountain wall. After sniffing for a while, it lifted its legs and peed under a rock not far from the stone door of the cave residence. Then it ran back leisurely, shaking its head and wagging its tail, looking very happy. Su Qingjun's face darkened. She stared at Lu Chen. Lu Chen had an awkward expression on his face. He laughed dryly and said, you see, this dog is like a human when it is old. It pees a lot, so disgusting. Well. Chapter 177. In any case, Lu Chen and the black dog were now temporarily staying at the Flying Goose platform. Compared to the days when they were working tirelessly as handyman disciples in Baichao Tang, it was much more comfortable. It was comfortable to have Jean Dan Fryer looking after them. Since he no longer had to work in the herb garden of the Flowing Fragrance Garden every day, his days suddenly became leisurely. Lu Chen also had more time to do his own things. After his injuries recovered, he began to go to the dense forest behind the Flying Goose platform to cut wood, preparing to build the wooden house he mentioned before. Of course, a wooden house was more comfortable than a straw hut. Moreover, the forest covered a wide area, and there were hundreds of thousands of trees. Naturally, Su Qingjun would not be stingy with these things. Since she was young, she had never seen anyone cut wood to build a house, so during this period, she often stood at the side and watched Lu Chen work curiously. It took 4 to 5 days to build the wooden house. After it was completed, Lu Chen was in a good mood. However, Su Qingjun shook her head at the side, saying that the wood of the house was not bad, but it looked ugly. Since he had the status of a nominal disciple and was temporarily staying on the Flying Goose Terrace, it was impossible for Lu Chen to really do nothing and idle around all day. It would be hard for him to explain himself to the outside world. Therefore, he picked up his old job and cleaned up the spiritual field on the Flying Goose platform. He also expanded the area. Then, Su Qingjun got some spiritual grass and spiritual fruit seeds and planted them in the spiritual field. From then on, Lu Chen officially became Su Qingjun, the hard worker, who was specially squeezed by Jean Dan Friar to farm. This kind of person was very common in the Kunlun party. Generally speaking, even though people who did this kind of work still had the identity of a handyman disciple, there was always someone above them. It would sound very good if people said that they were no longer a handyman disciple of the Kunlun party, but that they were someone under the command of a certain Jean Dan or a certain Jinren. Wouldn't that be a lot more impressive? Moreover, in terms of profit, the returns of the odd job disciples who worked for these high-grade cultivators were much higher than before. As a result, there were many times when everyone was racking their brains for this position. The reason why so many people wanted to participate in the eagle fruit cultivation competition at the Flowing Fragrance Garden was because they hoped that one day, Su Qingjun would take a fancy to them. The best outcome was actually Lu Chen's current situation. After receiving this kind of treatment, Lu Chen was much more free than before. The spiritual fruits and spiritual herbs planted in the spiritual fields were also not as delicate as the eagle fruit tree that he could not easily leave. As for Su Qingjun, she was also quite polite to him and did not really squeeze him for labor. It should be said that his life was still relatively relaxed. Therefore, Lu Chen now actually had time to wander around the Kunlun Mountains. These days, many people in the Kunlun party saw Lu Chen walking around leisurely with the black dog, which attracted the envy of many handyman disciples. One day after that, Lu Chen brought Atsu down from the Flying Goose platform and took a casual walk. Then, they walked to the house near the Flowing Fragrance Garden where someone had once died. Back then, He Changxing died in this house. It was daytime, and most of the people who lived nearby were the lowest-level handyman disciples. Every day, they had to go to the Flowing Fragrance Garden to work, so the surroundings were quiet and there were not many people walking around. On the day of the murder, the Kunlun party had sent people to seal off the nearby area, but after a long time of investigation, there were no results. Until now, the disciples who were guarding outside had also been withdrawn. Except for the house that was still unoccupied, this place seemed to be no different from the surroundings. The traces of the person named He Changxing in this world were quickly and completely dissipating. The wind blew gently from the forest. Lu Chen and Atsu stood quietly in the distance and looked at the house. Neither of them spoke, like two dark shadows, silent. After a while, Lu Chen turned and walked to the side. He no longer looked at the house, but walked into the wide forest on the other side. Atsu followed behind him and walked into the forest. During the day, the forest was slightly darker than outside, but the light shone through the gaps between the branches and leaves, making the forest appear brighter, and the surrounding trees could be seen clearly. Lu Chen walked in the forest with a calm expression. As he gradually went deeper into the forest, the surroundings quickly quietened down. The hustle and bustle that belonged to the Kunlun party seemed to be isolated outside the forest. In this forest, there was only silence. After walking for a while, he came to the place where he had come here to stare at late at night. That day, in a pitch-black night, this corner deep in the forest was so dark that one could not see their fingers in front of them, completely submerged in darkness. Now that it was daytime, Lu Chen could clearly see that there was actually a big tree in front of him. A big tree that looked very large and dense, older than the surrounding trees. The mottled bark was covered with moss, and a few drops of morning dew still remained on the branches and leaves. The strong roots protruded from the ground, looking like a giant claw tightly gripping the earth. Lu Chen stared at the tree for a while, then walked over. The forest was still silent. There was no wind, and there were no birds chirping. At this moment, the only sound seemed to be his footsteps, stepping on the dead leaves on the ground. The trunk of the big tree was very thick and large, requiring at least 2 people to wrap their arms around it. It was enough to hide the figure that was hiding. But this morning, when Lu Chen crossed the roots of the tree and walked to the back of the tree, it was empty. Atsu ran over and sniffed under the big tree for a while. It seemed that there was nothing special worth paying attention to, so it ran away to play at the side. Lu Chen looked at the big tree quietly, his eyes bright and focused. From the roots to the trunk, he looked at it bit by bit, as if he was carefully searching for something. However, nothing strange appeared on the big tree. There were no wounds, no scratches, and no hidden and twisted patterns. Everything seemed to be fruitless. Lu Chen frowned slightly. After pondering for a moment, he squatted down and carefully searched the roots of the tree that undulated like a horned dragon. He even used his hands to push away the dead leaves and black soil on the ground, and checked every hidden corner of the roots. However, in the end, he still found nothing. That evil sect spy hiding in the darkness seemed to have unusual patience and vigilance, and was not tempted this time. Lu Chen stood up, his face solemn. After a moment of contemplation, he called Atsu, turned and walked back the way he came, prepared to leave this place. A beam of sunlight shone down from the branches and leaves above his head, shone on his body, and also on the silent big tree beside him. The mottled traces seemed to have experienced the vicissitudes of countless years. Lu Chen continued to walk forward, but at the 5th step, he suddenly stopped. He frowned, seemed to have thought of something. The next moment, his eyes suddenly brightened, suddenly turned around, but stared intently at the front of the big tree, at the ancient and mottled traces on the tree trunk. The sunlight shone down, perhaps because it had experienced too much time. The bark on the tree trunk showed signs of cracking. Even in the daytime, the martyr's grave at the back of the nameless mountain was still shrouded in darkness. The sinister cold air seemed to not recede all year round, emitting a rare energy in this famous mountain. Usually, not many people came here. Most of the people, including the cultivators, preferred to live in the light, even if it was the stone walls and caves that were required for cultivation. In fact, most of them were located in the sunny places. But this day, a tall figure walked in from outside the martyr's grave, and knocked on that black door. Dongfang Tao, who had just achieved Yuanyingzhenren, came to the martyr's grave, this gloomy and gloomy place. There was no one around him, indicating that he had come alone. When the chilly wind blew past from an unknown corner, his expression was equally indifferent. Only a trace of deeply hidden disgust could be seen in the depths of his eyes. With a creak, the black door opened. In the gloomy courtyard, those dark rooms stood silently in the surroundings. Some were completely dark, some flickered with dim candlelight, as if guiding the direction of the dead on the dark path. Occasionally, when the wind blew, those little candlelight would actually instantly turn green, like the burning flames in the eyes of an evil spirit. After a moment, it slowly returned to its original appearance. A thin, shriveled figure, whose entire body seemed to be shrouded in darkness, stood alone in the middle of this courtyard. His cold eyes shot out an icy light, coldly looking at Dongfang Tao, who was walking in. Dongfang Tao first looked around, his gaze paused on those dark rooms, and those candlelight for a moment, finally landing on the corpse who was standing there, nodded, and said, "Long time no see." The corpse faintly laughed, and said, "Yes, you are always unwilling to come here to see me, of course. We have not seen each other for a long time." Dongfang Tao's expression did not change, and he calmly said, "This damned place is eerie, no one would like to come here." The corpse's gaze turned cold, and his voice seemed to raise a few octaves as he said, "But thanks to you, I have already stayed here for 34 years. Dongfang Tao frowned, and said, "Don't talk nonsense, you have sent someone to pass a message to me this time. What is the urgent matter?" After a pause, he suddenly snorted, and said, "Also, in the future, if you want to find someone to pass a message to, don't look for he. I don't like that person." Seeing that the corpse did not immediately answer him, and instead looked Dongfang Tao up and down, he then laughed coldly, and said, "You have become Yuanyingzhenren, so you immediately put on airs, huh? Is it that even if I want to find you in the future, I may not be able to summon you?" A trace of impatience flashed across Dongfang Tao's face, and he said, "If you have something to say, then say it, don't bring up old scores. and I will say it again. He stared at the corpse, and his voice also seemed to become a few degrees colder, and said, "Don't talk to me like it's all thanks to me, you have only yourself to blame for this ending of yours, junior brother." Chapter 178. Lu Chen walked in front of the tree and carefully looked at it for a while. Then, he suddenly stretched out his hand and gently stroked the tree trunk. The rough tree bark felt as rough as a rock as it brushed past his palm. The surroundings were still silent, but Lu Chen's eyes became brighter and brighter. His fingers moved slower and slower. After a while, when his fingers drew across a mottled crack, he suddenly stopped. The dry and cracked bark appeared dark brown at his fingertips. Lu Chen raised his eyebrows and gently pressed down on it again. Gradually, a fine crack appeared in the dark bark. With the movement of his fingers, the crack continued to expand until it became a piece of bark the size of a palm. It suddenly shook and then fell from the tree trunk. With a clatter, the piece of bark gently fell to the ground. Lu Chen didn't take a closer look. He just stared at the exposed trunk behind the piece of bark. On the smooth wood, someone had used a sharp blade to carve out a simple but twisted pattern. There was a thick line and several thin lines of different lengths and thicknesses. At first glance, it looked like random graffiti. However, upon closer inspection, one would realize that when these twisted lines were put together, they looked like a tree. A big tree. The corners of Lu Chen's mouth slowly curled into a smile. He stared closely at the incomparably secretive pattern, as if he wanted to commit it to memory. After a while, he flipped his right hand, and a black dagger appeared in his hand. Then, a black light flashed, and with a slash, he directly chopped off the piece of wood with the pattern carved on it. Then, he turned around and called out to Atsu. He quickly walked out of the forest without looking back. When Lu Chen returned to the Fian platform, he saw a pretty figure standing in front of him. At first, Lu Chen thought it was Su Qingjun, but he soon realized that something was wrong. When he took a few steps forward, he found that it was Xian. The black dog let out a happy bark and ran forward. Xian smiled and squatted down, hugged Atsu, and patted it vigorously. Atsu also happily jumped around her. After a while, Lu Chen came up and said with a smile, "Why did you come today?" Xian touched Atsu's head, then stood up and said to Lu Chen with a smile, "It's rare that I have time. I haven't seen you and Atsu for a long time, so I came to see you." Lu Chen said, "It sounds like you've been very busy recently." Xian said, "Isn't it so? Since my master came out of seclusion, people have been coming here one after another. As his only disciple, I'm very tired from receiving guests all day long. But those who are related to my master are all people of status, so I can't take it lightly. It's tiring." Lu Chen laughed and said, "Don't complain. It's better than having no one to take care of you before." Xian giggled. Lu Chen looked around and saw that the Fian platform was empty. The cave in the distance was not open, and the stone door was closed. He asked Xian, "Did you not see your sister Su when you came here?" Xian said, "No, I just came here not long ago. Sister Su hasn't come out yet, so I didn't dare to disturb her." Lu Chen nodded and said, "It's fine. Come sit with me." With that, he led Xian to the wooden house that he had built not long ago. After entering the wooden house, Xian looked around curiously. She saw that most of the house was made of wood, including the walls, tables, chairs, and beds. It was just that it had not been painted, so the whole house looked very rough, but at the same time, it exuded a natural fragrance of trees. Looking at Xian's expression, Lu Chen said with a smile, "What's wrong? You've never seen a house like this before, right?" Xian nodded and said, "Yes, it's really the first time I've seen it." "Did you build this all by yourself, Brother Lu?" "Yes." "That's amazing," Xian praised from the bottom of her heart. Lu Chen burst into laughter and pulled over a wooden chair for Xian to sit on. He said casually, "I just chopped some wood and tied it together." It's nothing to be surprised about. Xian laughed, and then suddenly seemed to think of something. Her face turned serious, and a sly look flashed in her eyes. She said to Lu Chen seriously, "Well, I came here today because I have another thing to inform you." Huh? So formal. Is it something important? Lu Chen asked curiously. Xian coughed and said, "I can't call you Brother Lu anymore." Ah, why? Lu Chen asked. You see, Xian said seriously, Sister Su and I have always been on the same level. But now that you have become Sister Su's nominal disciple, you have to call her master, right? Then when you see me, do you have to call me martial uncle? Lu Chen was stunned for a moment, and then he laughed and scolded, "Well, now you actually know how to take advantage of me." Xian snorted and said, "What advantage? If you dare not call Sister Su master, then I won't let you call me martial uncle." Lu Chen waved his hand and said, "What are you talking about? Su Qingjun is younger than me by a few years. How can I call her master? No way, no way." Xian laughed and said, "You can say that behind my back. When Sister Su really comes, let's see if you dare to admit it." Lu Chen said righteously, "A man won't call her master if I say I won't. Your threats are useless." Xian covered her mouth and giggled. She looked very happy. Looking at her appearance, Lu Chen also felt that his mood seemed to be a lot better. He smiled and said to her, "Didn't you say you were very busy? Why are you free today?" "Oh, my master went out to meet an old friend today, so I am free." Xian stretched and then leaned on the rough bed without any taboo. With a satisfied smile, she said, "It's still more comfortable here, Brother Lu. You don't know that in the Threezhong Peak cave residence, my face is sore from smiling all day long. Those people I know and don't know have to greet me with a smile. It's really 10 times more tiring than cultivating." Lu Chen jokingly scolded, "You really don't know how lucky you are. Still, it's quite annoying to see so many people every day. In the future, you can come over to my place to play whenever you're free. When I'm not around, you can chat with that big sister of yours." Xian shrugged and said, "It's fine if I want to chat with you. It won't disturb you. But Sister Su is a genius who is the focus of attention. She must seize the time to cultivate all day long. I don't dare to disturb her." Lu Chen thought for a moment and said, "Well, in fact, it's not completely like that. Your Sister Su sometimes likes to have someone to chat with. Anyway, it's not a bad thing for you to be close to her." Lu Chen said with a smile, "It's just a so-so. You know Sister Su quite well now." Lu Chen said with a smile, "It's just a so-so. By the way, there are so many immortals and big shots on this mountain. Who is your master going to visit?" Xian said, "My master didn't tell me. He just said goodbye to me and left. Sigh, he usually tells me where he's going." Probably thinking of this difference, Xian was a little depressed. Lu Chen saw that this girl's mood was so easily fluctuating and found it funny. He casually said some jokes and in the blink of an eye, he made Xian happy. The two chatted and laughed for a while. Seeing that it was getting late, Xian got up and said goodbye. Lu Chen saw her to the side of the mountain road and watched her go. But after a while, Xian suddenly turned back and said to Lu Chen, "Brother Lu, there is something I want to tell you." Lu Chen saw that her expression was a little serious and didn't seem to be joking. He was a little surprised and said, "What's wrong?" Xian said, "Before my master went out this time, someone came to visit him. It was Yi Shixiang." Lu Chen's face sank and said, "He Gang's big brother?" "Yes." Lu Chen could understand why Xian's face didn't look too good at the moment. After all, He Gang's matter was like a nightmare to her. It was a past that she really didn't want to recall. And He was He Gang's big brother. He Gang was directly driven out of Kunlun Mountain because of that matter. No matter how he looked at it, he and Xian were like fire and water. And Xian was Dongfang Tao's only disciple. Obviously, Dongfang Tao and He couldn't go together. But this matter happened like this. There was obviously something strange in it. Lu Chen thought for a moment and said, "What did they say that day? Did you hear it?" Xin thought for a moment and said, "I was at the side most of the time, but they said some polite words, nothing important. Later, when they were almost finished, I packed up the tea set and left for a while. I saw the two of them say a few more words, but I didn't hear the rest." Lu Chen frowned and didn't say anything for a moment. Xin looked a little worried. She was full of thoughts and said in a low voice, "Brother Lu, what do you think they talked about?" "My master, he couldn't have been moved by Xianxia, right?" Lu Chen looked at the young girl and sighed in his heart. Xin's good days today could be said to be almost entirely due to her receiving Dongfang Tao's appreciation. Dongfang Tao also unexpectedly broke through the great life and death juncture and became enlightened Yuanying. If Dongfang Tao was bewitched by He and had some opinions about Xin, then it could be said to be a disaster for her. No wonder she was not calm at all. Lu Chen thought for a moment and said to Xin, "Don't be anxious. In my opinion, this matter shouldn't be as bad as you think." He paused for a moment and said, "If you are still worried, I will think of a way to help you find out about He's recent movements." "Yes." Xin nodded heavily, a trace of a smile on her face. Although she knew that He Shixiang and Lu Chen's cultivation and strength were worlds apart, but for some reason, when Lu Chen said he would help her, Xin almost unconsciously believed him. What he said, he would definitely be able to do. Xin thought like this and her mood immediately improved. Chapter 179. "I'll go down the mountain tomorrow," Lu Chen said to Su Qingjun, who was standing not far away, as he sat on the ridge of the field with his back against a big tree. It was already dusk. Su Qingjun had stayed in the cave for a day and would come out to walk around at this time. It was a relatively fixed habit for her these days. Lu Chen didn't know if she had this habit when she lived alone on the Fian Terrace, but under normal circumstances, dusk was a fixed time for him to chat with this woman. Most of the time, it was relatively relaxing. Speaking of which, perhaps it was because she had made a big fuss when she returned to the Su family a while ago, which frightened the family. So these days, the Fian Terrace was unusually quiet. Often, no one came up for a few days. Occasionally, some people came over, but they were some friends of Su Qingjun from the Kunlun party. No one from the Su family came. Su Qingjun didn't have much of a reaction to this, at least in front of Lu Chen. These days, she looked very calm, but no one knew what this woman was thinking in the depths of her heart. Lu Chen wouldn't ask anything. After Su Qingjun made a big fuss in the Su family and returned to the mountain, the two of them quickly stopped talking about this matter. But compared to before, their relationship was undoubtedly much closer. Even Su Qingjun could joke with Lu Chen more casually in private. At this moment, Su Qingjun smiled and asked Lu Chen, "What are you going to do? I see that you're very free recently. How about growing more spiritual herbs in the spiritual field?" Lu Chen laughed and said, "I'm going to go down the mountain for a walk. In addition, I know some small things that you definitely haven't seen before. I'll bring some back for you to broaden your horizons." "Huh?" Su Qingjun was only joking at first, but her curiosity was piqued after hearing Lu Chen's explanation. She asked, "What is it?" "It sounds very interesting." Lu Chen smiled and said, "You'll know when I bring it back. I'll come to see you tomorrow night." "Oh, okay." The next morning, Lu Chen got up and went down the mountain with the black dog. Now that he was a nominal disciple of Jin Dan Friar, his identity was different. He was no longer as embarrassed as before. Dogs were valued by their owners. Recently, Atsu could also follow Lu Chen to wander around openly, ignoring the original rule of the Kunlun party that no one could keep a dog casually. The dog raised by the disciple of the genius Jin Dan, how could it be an ordinary dog? On the way down the mountain and into Kunwa City, Lu Chen didn't rush to find old Ma in the secluded alley. Instead, he took Atsu to wander around the street. Along the way, he bought a lot of meat and bones for Atsu. He put them in a bag and carried them all the way to Black Hill Pavilion to feed Atsu. This made Atsu greedy. Along the way, it drooled and stared at the bag in Lu Chen's hand. It couldn't see anything else. Then, Lu Chen wandered around the street for a while and bought a few things before he took Atsu back to Black Hill Pavilion. After entering the house and going to the small courtyard in the back, Lu Chen scattered the meat and bones on the ground in a corner. Atsu immediately roared and rushed over to pounce on the food like a fierce dog, chewing loudly. At the side, Old Ma was amused and said with a smile, "This guy must have been starving on the mountain. Why is he eating like this? It's like he hasn't eaten anything in 8 lifetimes." Lu Chen chuckled and said, "It's living a very comfortable life, so you don't need to worry about it. How about I leave it with you and you take care of it?" Old Ma immediately waved his hand and said, "Forget it. Pretend I didn't say anything. I can't afford to take care of this dog." The two of them sat facing each other. Old Ma looked at him and said, "It hasn't been long since you went down the mountain. Why did you come back? Besides, there are many people from the Su family in this city. Aren't you afraid of another accident?" Lu Chen smiled and said, "The Su family won't dare to court disaster again. It's fine." Old Ma said with a smile, "You sound so sure. It seems you have a card up your sleeve." Lu Chen snorted and said, "In any case, the Su family is an old aristocratic family that has been entrenched in Kunwu City for many years. There must be a few people in the family who understand the situation. With the current situation, anyone with the slightest bit of knowledge knows that the Su family will rely on Su Qingjun the most in the future. Not everyone is as stupid as those wastes and that Madame Bai." Old Ma nodded and said, "You're right. If I were a member of the Su family, the most important thing right now would be to ease the relationship with eldest Miss Su as soon as possible and use their blood relationship to move her. The more we do, the more mistakes we'll make. It'd be best if we didn't do anything." There was some regret on Lu Chen's face. He said, "That's right. I originally thought I'd draw out a few more wastes today and see if I could use this opportunity to stir up trouble and sow discord between Su Qingjun and that family. Unfortunately, there really are people with discerning eyes. I wasted my time walking around the streets." Old Ma sneered and said, "You're too evil. You want to destroy the Su family from the root." Lu Chen sneered but didn't say anything. "Right, there's one more thing. If you have time, can you help me pay attention to He Yi's recent movements and see if there's anything strange?" Lu Chen said to Old Ma. "He Yi?" Old Ma frowned and his eyes seemed to suddenly look a little strange. He looked at Lu Chen and asked, "Why are you suddenly concerned about this person?" Lu Chen didn't hide it and casually repeated what Xian had said to him. In the end, he said, "I've always felt that this He Yi is a little strange." Last time, he was clearly forced into seclusion, but after a period of time, he was suddenly released for no reason. It seems that he's been wandering around the Kunlun party recently and seems to be meeting people everywhere. Old Ma's eyes flashed and he didn't say anything. Lu Chen noticed his expression and said, "What's wrong?" Old Ma looked at him meaningfully and said, "You're right. He Yi is indeed strange." Do you remember I told you last time that someone was investigating the matter of the cinnabar?" "I remember. What did you find?" Lu Chen asked. Old Ma laughed coldly and said, "The person who was investigating was He Gang." Lu Chen's expression changed slightly and he sat up a little straighter. After thinking for a moment, he suddenly said, "But you said before that the person who investigated this matter showed a token of the Kunlun party to some big shops?" "That's right." Lu Chen's eyes slowly lit up and he said, "But He Gang has clearly been chased out of the sect by the Kunlun party." "That's right." Old Ma had a faint smile on his face and said, "In other words, he shouldn't have this kind of thing." Lu Chen looked at Old Ma and said slowly, "But he has it and showed it to others. The person who could give him this kind of token. It can only be He Yi." Lu Chen fell silent and a thoughtful expression appeared on his face as if he had thought of more things. After a moment, he said in a low voice, in other words, the person who wanted to investigate the cinnabar matter was he himself. It was just that he couldn't do it himself, so he sent He Gang to do it. Old Ma nodded and said, that's right. He Gang did this secretly. It took me a lot of effort to confirm that it was him. Lu Chen's eyes grew brighter and brighter as he said in a low voice, the cinnabar is usually not important, but recently it is related to a murder case of the devil sect on the Kunlun mountain. He suddenly came out of seclusion and intervened in this matter, so the reason why he was suddenly released, the corner of his mouth slowly showed a hint of a smile, but it was not gentle and carried a hint of coldness. After looking at Old Ma pointed a finger at him with an indifferent expression. He's coming for you. I didn't expect that there would be someone secretly pursuing me on the Kunlun mountain. This feeling. Lu Chen clicked his tongue. Old Ma squinted at him and said, what's so strange about it? Haven't you been like this for so many years? You should be used to it, right? Well, you're right. Lu Chen nodded and said, but since we know this person's purpose, it's all the more important that we investigate him. He looked at Old Ma. Old Ma nodded and said, don't worry, leave it to me. Good. After saying these words, both of them breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. At the same time, there was a faint hint of excitement on their faces. For the shadow hiding in the dark, discovering such a secret might have a different feeling. Hey, I see that you're in good spirits recently. Old Ma said to Lu Chen with a smile. Lu Chen said, yes, I'm busy with revenge. There are so many debts to collect. If I don't be in good spirits, how can I finish it? Old Ma glanced at him and said, no, I feel that you're not the same as before. When you were a shadow, you always looked bitter and hateful all day, as if you would turn hostile and kill people at the slightest disagreement. But it's different now. Lu Chen was startled and said, what do you mean by that? Old Ma stared at him and said, these days, I always feel that you seem to be more cheerful than before. Has your temperament changed? Or is there someone on the Kunlun mountain that made your mood better? Lu Chen was silent for a moment. Suddenly, a strange light flashed in the depths of his eyes. Then, he suddenly laughed and scolded Old Ma with a smile, **T. I'm a shadow, and there are thousands of incarnations. How can you see through me? How do you know that what I showed you before wasn't fake, and that what you see now is real? Old Ma nodded and said, well, what you said makes sense. Sometimes, I really can't see through you. But look at yourself. Aren't you tired of living like this? He smiled and said to Lu Chen, there's only the two of us here. Just relax. Otherwise, if you keep pretending, I'm afraid that you'll go crazy in the future. Go to hell. I won't go crazy even if you go crazy. Lu Chen scolded. Old Ma laughed and walked to the side to tease Atsu, who was still eating. Lu Chen looked at his back, and the smile on his face gradually faded. Chapter 180. On the way back to the mountain, he brought Atsu, whose belly seemed to have grown bigger and had almost swallowed all the meat and bones, back to the mountain. Along the way, he could only hear the dog's burps. The weather was clear in the afternoon. The scenery in Kunlun Mountain was quiet and beautiful. The forest was green and the trees were undulating. Occasionally, one or two waterfalls could be seen, making people walking on the mountain road feel like they were in a fairyland. In the blessed land of Spirited Mountain, spirit chi seemed to be everywhere. There were not many people on the mountain road. Because this place was within the mountain gate of Kunlun Mountain, all one could see were Kunlun disciples. There were all kinds of people, but almost all of them were chi refining and foundation establishment disciples. After all, most of the odd job disciples had a lot of things to do, so it was impossible for them to be so leisurely. Therefore, in comparison, Lu Chen was a bit conspicuous. Fortunately, there were not many people. Secondly, most of the cultivators were too lazy to meddle in other people's business, so no one paid attention to him. After walking like this for a while, Lu Chen suddenly saw a person walking on the opposite mountain road in front of him. Several people in the same direction in front of Lu Chen, whether they were Foundation Establishment disciples or Qi Refining disciples, after seeing that person, almost all of them immediately nodded and smiled to greet him. In the voice that floated with the wind, he could also clearly hear the words, "Senior brother he," and so on. Lu Chen's footsteps stopped. He looked ahead and watched the person get closer. Gradually, he could see that handsome and determined face clearly. After a moment, he stood on the side of the road with his head slightly bowed. When that person passed by him, he calmly called out like the others, "Senior brother he." When passing by Lu Chen, He's footsteps slightly slowed down. He turned his head to look at the inconspicuous odd job disciple standing on the side of the road. He nodded to him and then continued to walk forward. A wind blew from the forest and made a small whirl between the two of them. It blew up a fallen leaf, floated up and fell down, rolling and floating into the distance. Peace returned to the mountain path. Lu Chen stood where he was for a while. When the other Kunlun disciples had gone far away, only the black dog was still squatting beside him. Lu Chen glanced at Atsu and suddenly said, "Since we've met, and we have nothing to do anyway, why don't we go and take a look?" Atsu tilted his head, looking a little confused. Lu Chen turned around and walked in another direction. He had walked this path before, but now he was far away. However, Lu Chen was not in a hurry to catch up. Instead, he walked slowly. By his side, Atu was running a few steps in front of him. He sniffed the ground lightly and then jogged forward. Just like that, Lu Chen followed Atsu, walking and walking. After walking for a long time, looking at the surrounding mountain terrain, Lu Chen suddenly frowned. This was because the mountain path in this direction was getting more and more desolate, and there were no signs of accommodation. As they went deeper, even human footprints became rare. Weeds began to appear on the road, exuding a desolate aura. After walking for a while, with Atsu's unusually sensitive nose leading the way, Lu Chen had walked a long distance on this secluded mountain path. Then, he suddenly saw the nameless mountain in front of him, hidden under the tall mountain range, mostly shrouded in shadows. Although it was very far away, a very strong gloomy aura still came over. Lu Chen's expression changed slightly, then he looked forward. In the distance, he could only vaguely see a blurry back of He, who seemed to be walking alone into the dark side of the nameless mountain. There was a condensed darkness there, as if it had swallowed He's figure in an instant, and nothing else could be seen. Lu Chen glanced at the mountain terrain on his left and right, and finally, his eyes fell on the nameless mountain. After a while, he muttered to himself, "I didn't expect there to be such a dark place in the mountains of Kunlun. It shouldn't be." He looked a little surprised and a little confused, but he quickly calmed down again, ready to take a step forward. But before he took a step forward, he suddenly thought of something and looked back at Atsu. The black dog was sitting quietly on the ground behind him, and when Lu Chen looked over, it even wagged its tail gently. Lu Chen pondered for a moment, walked over, squatted down, and patted Atsu's head, saying, "There should be some bad things in the field in front, don't go there." It was not clear if Atsu understood him, but it just looked up at Lu Chen, barked twice, and then stuck out its tongue to lick Lu Chen's palm. Lu Chen smiled, and his smile seemed to be the most gentle of the day. He reached out and hugged Atu's head, then patted its head and said in a low voice, "Go and play by yourself. Wait for me here, or when it gets dark, go to the Flying Goose Terrace to sleep. Do you understand?" Atsu barked, then got up and walked to the side of the mountain path, looking back at Lu Chen from time to time. Lu Chen smiled at it, and waited until Atsu ran into the forest next to the mountain and disappeared before he slowly turned around and looked at the darkness behind the mountain again, a silent look on his face again. After a moment, he walked forward quietly until he reached the edge of the darkness, and then, like a drop of water falling into the sea, his figure disappeared into the depths of the darkness without any movement. Atsu ran and played in the forest, breathing the fresh air, jumping up and down, sometimes beating the birds, sometimes digging holes in the ground, playing very freely, and seemed to have forgotten its owner. Unknowingly, it had walked a long way in the forest, and came to a small valley in the forest that was sunken and covered with white granite. Atsu was a dog, and for a long time, it was only interested in food, and didn't care much about other things like stones and trees. It had the same reaction to this white stone valley, and slowly walked past the side of the valley, looking like it was going to continue running forward. But at this moment, a beautiful little girl's face suddenly appeared on the largest white rock in the valley. She looked at Atsu and suddenly smiled, then lay on the largest rock, waved at Atsu, and shouted, "Come here." When Atsu turned his head to look, he saw a little girl of about 10 years of age. Although she was young, her temperament was different from others. Now, there was a faint aura of superiority about her. This beautiful girl was, of course, White Lotus. Atsu stood where he was, looking a little surprised, but also a little wary. It seemed surprised to see White Lotus in this remote corner, but it didn't seem to lower its guard. However, White Lotus didn't seem to hate this black dog. Instead, she waved at Atsu and said with a smile, "Stupid dog, why don't you come over?" Atsu hesitated for a moment, but still slowly walked over. As Atsu approached, the smile on White Lotus's face was first shocked, then slowly disappeared, and her face became a little gloomy. She saw the wounds on Atsu's body, as well as the missing eye and half of its tail. Everything seemed to tell her that something terrible had happened to this dog. Atsu slowly walked to the bottom of the huge rock, then raised his head to look at White Lotus. In a flash, White Lotus slowly fell from the top of the rock, landing not far from Atsu. What happened? White Lotus looked at Atsu's appearance, frowned, and asked Atsu. Atsu responded with a bark, but it seemed that no one could understand it. This made Atsu look a little depressed and disappointed. However, White Lotus's eyes fell on the terrible wounds on Atsu's body again, and murmured, "It seems that the blood of the Sirius in your body is very good. You can still survive after being tortured like this." She slowly squatted in front of Atsu, and Atsu instinctively took a step back. From the beginning to the end, Atsu looked at White Lotus with a trace of fear and wariness. Something's not right. Suddenly, White Lotus opened her mouth. She stared at Atsu as if she had found something strange. After pondering for a while, she suddenly said in a low voice, "How is it possible? It seems, there is the smell of blood food." She reached out a hand and slowly placed it on Atsu's head. Atsu's body was a little tense, but it still obediently lay on the ground, showing a submissive posture. White Lotus seemed to be very satisfied with this, and she had no intention of making things difficult for Atsu. Her expression was focused on thinking, and after a while, she said to herself, "On this mountain of Kunlun, there is actually a second person who knows the secret method of blood food? Who is that person?" She lowered her head, stared at Atsu's eyes, and suddenly asked. Her voice sounded a little cold, but Atsu suddenly stood up from the ground after a moment of silence. It looked at White Lotus and suddenly let out a low growl from its throat. It was like a ferocious beast that had been provoked and angered, and it slowly bared its snow-white fangs at White Lotus. White Lotus looked at Atsu's actions and suddenly smiled. Beasts will be beasts. No matter how talented they are, aren't they still stupid? I know this person. She reached out her hand and patted Atsu's head. Atsu turned its head to the side, wanting to dodge, but it only felt its vision blur. White Lotus's palm still touched its head, and it happened to press down on its head. White Lotus's brows relaxed, and she gently flicked her fingers. Gradually, white smoke floated out from between her fingers. It carried a strong chill, and it evaporated in the air like the coldest ice cube. Snow Wind Sutra. This was the unique secret method of the Kunlun party's Dong Feng, the soul formation perfected Lord by Chen. Atsu seemed to have sensed something, and it immediately lay down, not daring to move recklessly. White Lotus smiled, nodded, and said, "It seems that you are still smart. Is this also the Sirius bloodline? But I'm a little curious. Why didn't the secret method of blood food make you, a beast, go crazy? This doesn't seem reasonable. Let me take a closer look." You're tuning into the Carefree Valley YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.